The Class Struggles in France, 1850. Translated by Friedrich Engels. Contents. Part 1. The defeat of June 1848, Part 2. From June 1848 to June 13th, 1849, Part 3. Consequences of June 13th, 1849, Part 4. The abolition of universal suffrage in 1850. Source of text. Marxists Internet Archive. Marxists. Org. Part I. The defeat of June 1848 after the July Revolution, when the liberal banker Lafitte led his compeer, the Duke of Orleans, in triumph to the Hotel de Ville. He let fall the words, "From now on the bankers will rule." Lafitte had betrayed the secret of the revolution. It was not the French bourgeoisie that ruled under Louis Philippe, but one faction of it. Bankers, stock exchange kings, railway kings, owners of coal and iron mines and forests, a part of the landed proprietors associated with them, the so-called financial aristocracy. It sat on the throne, it dictated laws in the chambers, it distributed public offices from cabinet portfolios to tobacco bureau posts. The industrial bourgeoisie proper formed part of the official opposition, that is, it was represented only as a minority in the chambers. Its opposition was expressed all the more resolutely the more unalloyed the autocracy of the finance aristocracy became. And the more it imagined that its domination over the working class was ensured after the revolts of 1832, 1834, and 1839, which had been drowned in blood. Grandin, a ruin manufacturer and the most fanatical instrument of bourgeois reaction in the constituent as well as in the legislative national Assembly, was the most violent opponent of Guizot in the Chamber of Deputies. Léon Faucher, later known for his impotent efforts to climb into prominence as the Guizot of the French Counter-Revolution. In the last days of Louis Philippe, waged a war of the pen for industry against speculation and its train-bearer, the government. Bastiat agitated in the name of Bordeaux and the whole of wine, producing France against the ruling system. The petty bourgeoisie of all gradations, and the peasantry also, were completely excluded from political power. Finally, in the official opposition or entirely outside the pays legal, there were the ideological representatives and spokesmen of the above classes, their savants, lawyers, doctors, etc., in a word, their so-called men of talent. Owing to its financial straits, the July monarchy was dependent from the beginning on the big bourgeoisie, and its dependence on the big bourgeoisie was the inexhaustible source of increasing financial straits. It was impossible to subordinate the administration of the state to the interests of national production without balancing the budget, without establishing a balance between state expenditures and revenues. And how was this balance to be established without limiting state expenditures? That is, without encroaching on interests which were so many props of the ruling system, and without redistributing taxes. That is, without shifting a considerable share of the burden of taxation onto the shoulders of the big bourgeoisie itself. On the contrary, the faction of the bourgeoisie that ruled and legislated through the chambers had a direct interest in the indebtedness of the state. The state deficit was really the main object of its speculation and the chief source of its enrichment. At the end of each year, a new deficit. After the lapse of 4 or 5 years, a new loan, and every new loan offered new opportunities to the finance aristocracy for defrauding the state, which was kept artificially on the verge of bankruptcy. It had to negotiate with the bankers under the most unfavorable conditions. Each new loan gave a further opportunity, that of plundering the public, which invested its capital in state bonds by means of stock exchange manipulations, the secrets of which the government and the majority in the chambers were privy to. In general, the instability of state credit and the possession of state secrets gave the associates in the chambers and on the throne the possibility of evoking sudden, extraordinary fluctuations in the quotations of government securities, the result of which was always bound to be the ruin of a mass of smaller capitalists and the fabulously rapid enrichment of the big gamblers. As the state deficit was in the direct interest of the ruling faction of the bourgeoisie, it is clear why the extraordinary state expenditure in the last years of Louis Philippe's reign was far more than double the extraordinary state expenditure under Napoleon. Indeed, reached a yearly sum of nearly 400 million francs, whereas the whole average annual export of France seldom attained a volume amounting to 750 million francs. The enormous sums which in this way flowed through the hands of the state facilitated, moreover, swindling. Contracts for deliveries, bribery, defalcations, and all kinds of roguery. The defrauding of the state, practiced wholesale in connection with loans, was repeated retail and public works. What occurred in the relations between chamber and government became multiplied in the relations between individual and individual departments entrepreneurs. The ruling class exploited the building of railways in the same way it exploited state expenditures in general and state loans. The chambers piled the main burdens on the state and secured the golden fruits of the speculating finance aristocracy. One recalls the scandals in the Chamber of Deputies when by chance it leaked out that all the members of the majority, including a number of ministers, had been interested as shareholders in the very railway constructions which as legislators they had carried out afterward at the cost of the state. On the other hand, the smallest financial reform was through the influence direct of the bankers. For example, the postal reform. Rothschild protested. Was it permissible for the state to curtail sources of revenue out of which interest was to be paid on its ever-increasing debt? The July monarchy was nothing other than a joint stock company for the exploitation of France's national wealth, whose dividends were divided among ministers, chambers, 240,000 voters, and their adherents. Louis Philippe was the director of this company. Robert Macaire on the throne. Trade, industry, agriculture, shipping, the interests of the industrial bourgeoisie were bound to be continually endangered and prejudiced under the system. Cheap government a bon marché, was what it had inscribed on its banner in the July days. Since the finance aristocracy made the laws, was at the head of the administration of the state, had command of all the organized public authorities, dominated public opinion through the actual state of affairs and through the press. The same prostitution, the same shameless cheating, the same mania to get rich was repeated in every sphere. From the court to the café borné to get rich not by production, but by pocketing the already available wealth of others, clashing every moment with the bourgeois laws themselves. An unbridled assertion of unhealthy and dissolute appetites manifested itself, particularly at the top of bourgeois society lusts, wherein wealth derived from gambling naturally seeks its satisfaction, where pleasure becomes crapuleux, where money, filth, and blood commingle. The finance aristocracy, in its mode of acquisition as well as in its pleasures, is nothing but the rebirth of the lumpen proletariat on the heights of bourgeois society. The and the non-ruling factions of the French bourgeoisie cried corruption. The people cried, "Abasse les grands voyeurs, abasse les assassins." When in 1847, the most prominent stages of bourgeois society, the same scenes were publicly enacted that regularly lead the lumpen proletariat to brothels, to workhouses and lunatic asylums, to the bar of justice, to the dungeon, and to the scaffold. The industrial bourgeoisie saw its interests endangered. The petty bourgeoisie was filled with moral indignation. The imagination of the people was offended. Paris was flooded with pamphlets. The Rothschild dynasty, usurers, kings of the epoch, etc., in which the rule of the finance aristocracy was denounced and stigmatized with greater or less wit. Rien pour la gloire, glory brings no profit. La paix partout et toujours. War depresses the quotations of the 3 and 4% which the France of the bourgeois jobbers had inscribed on her banner. Her foreign policy was therefore lost in a series of mortifications to French national sentiment, which reacted all the more vigorously when the rape of Poland was brought to a conclusion with the incorporation of Krakow by Austria, and when Guizot came out actively on the side of the Holy Alliance in the Swiss separatist war. The victory of the Swiss liberals in this mimic war raised the self-respect of the bourgeois opposition in France. The bloody uprising of the people in Palermo worked like an electric shock on the paralyzed masses of the people and awoke their great revolutionary memories and passions. Annexation of Krakow by Austria in agreement with Russia and Prussia on November 11, 1846. Swiss Sonderbund War. November 4 to 28, 1847. Rising in Palermo, January 12, 1848. At the end of January, 9 days bombardment of the town by the Neapolitans. Note by Engels to the edition of 1895. The eruption of the general discontent was finally accelerated and the mood for revolt ripened by 2 economic world events. The potato blight and the crop failures of 1845 and 1846 increased the general ferment among the people. The famine of 1847 called forth bloody conflicts in France as well as on the rest of the continent. As against the shameless orgies of the finance aristocracy, the struggle of the people for the prime necessities of life. At Buzançais, hunger riders. Executed. In Paris, oversatiated escrocs snatched from the courts by the royal family. The second great economic event that hastened the outbreak of the revolution was a general commercial and industrial crisis in England. Already heralded in the autumn of 1845 by the wholesale reverses of the speculators and railway shares, staved off during 1846 by a number of incidents such as the impending abolition of the Corn Laws. The crisis finally burst in the autumn of 1847 with the bankruptcy of the London wholesale grocers, on the heels of which followed the insolvencies of the land banks and the closing of the factories in the English industrial districts. The after effect of this crisis on the continent had not yet spent itself when the February Revolution broke out. The devastation of trade and industry caused by the economic epidemic made the autocracy of the finance aristocracy still more unbearable. Throughout the whole of France, the bourgeois opposition agitated at banquets for an electoral reform which should win for it the majority in the Anne chambers overthrow the ministry of the bourse. In Paris, the industrial crisis had, moreover, the particular result of throwing a multitude of manufacturers and big traders, who under the existing circumstances small could no longer do any business in the foreign market, onto the home market. They set up large establishments, the competition of which ruined the épiciers and boutiquiers en masse. Hence the innumerable bankruptcies among this section of the Paris bourgeoisie, and hence their revolutionary action in February. It is well known how Guizot and the chambers answered the reform proposals with an unambiguous challenge, how Louis Philippe too late resolved on a ministry led by Barrett, how things went as far as hand-to-hand fighting between the people and the army, how the army was disarmed by the passive conduct of the National Guard, how the July monarchy had to give way to a provisional government. The provisional government, which from the February emerged barricades, necessarily mirrored in its composition the different parties which shared in the victory. It could not be anything but a compromise between the different classes which together had overturned the July throne, but whose interests were mutually antagonistic. The great majority of its members consisted of representatives of the bourgeoisie. The Republican petty bourgeoisie was represented by Ledru Rollin and Flocon, the Republican bourgeoisie by the people from the National, the dynastic opposition by Crémieux, Dupont de l'Or, etc. The working class had only 2 representatives, Louis Blanc and Albert. Finally, Lamartine in the provisional government. This was at first no real interest, no definite class. This was the February Revolution itself, common uprising with its illusions, its poetry, its visionary content, and its phrases. For the rest, the spokesman of the February Revolution, by his position and his views, belonged to the bourgeoisie. If Paris, as a result of political centralization, rules France the workers, in moments of revolutionary earthquakes rule Paris. The first act in the life of the provisional government was an attempt to escape from this overpowering influence by an appeal from intoxicated Paris to sober France. Lamartine disputed the right of the barricade fighters to proclaim a republic on the ground that only the majority of Frenchmen had that right. They must await their votes. The Paris proletariat must not besmirch its victory by usurpation. The bourgeoisie allows the proletariat only one usurpation, that of fighting. Up to noon of February 25, the republic had not yet been proclaimed. On the other hand, all the ministries had already been divided among the bourgeois elements of the provisional government and among the generals, bankers, and lawyers of the national. But the workers were determined this time not to put up with any bamboozlement like that of July 1830. They were ready to take up the fight anew and to get a republic by force of arms. With this message, Raspail betook himself to the Hotel de Ville. In the name of the Paris proletariat, he commanded the provisional government to proclaim a republic. If this order of the people were not fulfilled within 2 hours, he would return at the head of 200,000 men. The bodies of the fallen were scarcely cold. The barricades were not yet disarmed, and the only force that could be opposed to them was the National Guard. Under these circumstances, the doubts born of considerations of state policy and the juristic scruples of conscience entertained by the provisional government suddenly vanished. The time limit of 2 hours had not yet expired when all the walls of Paris were resplendent with the gigantic historical words, République Française, Liberté, Fraternité. Even the memory of the limited alms and motives which drove the bourgeoisie into the February Revolution was extinguished by the proclamation of the Republic on the basis of universal suffrage. Instead of only a few factions of the bourgeoisie, all classes of French society were suddenly hurled into the orbit of political power, forced to leave the boxes, the stalls, and the gallery, and to act in person upon the revolutionary stage. With the constitutional monarchy vanished also the semblance of a state power independently confronting bourgeois society, as well as the whole series of subordinate struggles which the semblance of power called forth. By dictating the republic to the provisional government, and through the provisional government to the whole of France, the proletariat immediately stepped into the foreground as an independent party, but at the same time challenged the whole of bourgeois France to enter the lists against it. What it won was the terrain for the fight for its revolutionary emancipation, but by no means this emancipation itself. The first thing the February Republic had to do was rather to complete the rule of the bourgeoisie by allowing, besides the finance aristocracy, all the property classes to enter the orbit of political power. The majority of the great landowners, the legitimists, were emancipated from the political nullity to which they had been condemned by the July monarchy. Not for nothing had the Gazette day France agitated in common with the opposition papers. Not for nothing had La Roche-Jacquelain taken the side of the revolution in the session of the Chamber of Deputies on February 24. The nominal proprietors, the peasants, who formed the great majority of the French people, were put by universal suffrage in the position of arbiters of the fate of France. The February Republic finally brought the rule of the bourgeoisie clearly into view, since it struck off the crown behind which capital had kept itself concealed. Just as the workers in the July days had fought for and won the bourgeois monarchy, so in the February days they fought for and won the bourgeois republic. Just as the July monarchy had to proclaim itself a monarchy surrounded by republican institutions, so the February Republic was forced to proclaim itself a republic surrounded by social institutions. The Paris proletariat compelled this concession too. Demarche, a worker, dictated the decree by which the newly formed provisional government pledged itself guarantee the workers a livelihood by means of labor, to provide work for all citizens, etc. And when a few days later it forgot its promises and seemed to have lost sight of the proletariat, a mass of 20,000 workers marched on the Hotel de Ville with the cry, "Organize labor, form a special ministry of labor." Reluctantly and after long debate, the provisional government nominated a permanent special commission charged with lending means of improving the lot of the working classes. This commission consisted of delegates from the corporations of Paris artisans and was presided over by Louis Blanc and Albert. The Luxembourg Palace was assigned to it as its meeting place. In this way, the representatives of the working class were banished from the seat of the provisional government, the bourgeois part of which retained the real state power and the reins of administration exclusively in its hands, and side by side with the ministries of finance, trade, and public works, side by side with the bank and the bourse, there arose a socialist synagogue whose high priests, Louis Blanc and Albert, had the task of discovering the promised land, of preaching the new gospel, and of providing work for the Paris proletariat. Unlike any profane state power, they had no budget, no executive authority at their disposal. They were supposed to break the pillars of bourgeois society by dashing their heads against them. While Luxembourg sought the philosopher's stone in the Hotel de Ville, they minted the current coinage. And yet the claims of the Paris proletariat, so far as they went beyond the bourgeois republic, could win no other existence than the nebulous one of the Luxembourg. In common with the bourgeoisie, the workers had made the February Revolution, and alongside the bourgeoisie, they sought to secure the advancement of their interests. Just as they had installed a worker in the provisional government itself alongside the bourgeois majority. Organize labor, but wage labor, that is the existing, the bourgeois organization of labor. Without it, there is no capital, no bourgeoisie, no bourgeois society. A special ministry of labor, but the ministries of finance, of trade, of public works are not these the bourgeois ministries of labor. And alongside these, a proletariat ministry of labor had to be a ministry of impotence, a ministry of pious wishes, a Luxembourg commission. Just as the workers thought they would be able to emancipate themselves side by side with the bourgeoisie, so they thought they would be able to consummate a proletarian revolution within the national walls of France, side by side with the remaining bourgeois nations. But French relations of production are conditioned by the foreign trade of France, by her position on the world market and the laws thereof. How was France to break them without a European revolutionary war which would strike back at the despot of the world market, England? As soon as it has risen up, a class in which the revolutionary interests of society are concentrated finds the content and the material for its revolutionary activity directly in its own situation. Foes to be laid low, measures dictated by the needs of the struggle to be taken, the consequences of its own deeds drive it on. It makes no theoretical inquiries into its own task. The French working class had not attained this level. It was still incapable of accomplishing its own revolution. The development of the industrial proletariat is, in general, conditioned by the development of the industrial bourgeoisie. Only under its rule does the proletariat gain that extensive national existence which can raise its revolution to a national one, and only thus does the proletariat itself create the modern means of production, which become just so many means of its revolutionary emancipation. Only bourgeois rule tears up the material roots of feudal society and levels the ground on which alone a proletarian revolution is possible. French industry is more developed and the French bourgeoisie more revolutionary than that of the rest of the continent. But was not the industrial February Revolution aimed directly against the finance aristocracy? This fact proved that the bourgeoisie did not rule France. The industrial bourgeoisie can rule only where modern industry shapes all property relations to suit itself, and industry can win this power only where it has conquered the world market. For national bounds are inadequate for its development. But French industry, to a great extent, maintains its command even of the national market only through a more or less modified system of prohibitive duties. While therefore the French proletariat, at the moment of a revolution, possesses in Paris actual power and influence which spur it on to a drive beyond its means. In the rest of France, it is crowded into separate scattered industrial centers, almost lost in a superior number of peasants and petty bourgeois. The struggle against capital in its developed modern form in its decisive aspect, the struggle of the industrial wage worker against the industrial bourgeois, is in France a partial phenomenon, which after the February days could so much the less supply the national content of the revolution, since the struggle against capital's secondary modes exploitation, that of the peasant against usury and mortgages, or the petty bourgeois against the wholesale dealer, banker, and of manufacturer, in a word, against bankruptcy, was still hidden in the general uprising against the finance aristocracy. Nothing is more understandable then than that the Paris proletariat sought to secure the advancement of its own interests side by side with those of the bourgeoisie. Instead of enforcing them as the revolutionary interests of society itself, that it let the red flag be lowered to the tricolor. The French workers could not take a step forward, could not touch a hair of the bourgeois order, until the course of the revolution had aroused the mass of the nation, peasants and petty bourgeois, standing between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, against this order, against the rule of capital, and had forced it to attach itself to the proletarians as its protagonists. The workers could buy this victory only through the tremendous defeat in June of the Luxembourg Commission. This creation of the Paris workers must be given the credit having disclosed from a Europe-wide tribune the secret of the revolution of the 19th century, the emancipation of the proletariat. The Moniteur blushed when it had to propagate officially the wild ravings which up to that time had lain buried in the apocryphal writings of the socialists and reached the ear of the bourgeoisie only. From time to time as remote, half terrifying, half ludicrous legends. Europe awoke astonished from its bourgeois doze. Therefore, in the minds of the proletarians who confused the finance aristocracy with the bourgeoisie in general, in the imagination of the good old republicans who denied the very existence of classes, or at most admitted them as a result of the constitutional monarchy, in the hypocritical phrases of the factions of the bourgeoisie which up to now had been excluded from power, the rule of the bourgeoisie was abolished with the introduction of the republic. At that time, all the royalists were transformed into republicans, and all the millionaires of Paris into workers. The phrase which corresponded to this imaginary abolition of class relations was fraternite, universal fraternization and brotherhood. This pleasant abstraction from class antagonisms, this sentimental reconciliation of contradictory class interests, this visionary elevation above the class struggle, this fraternite, was the real catchword of the February Revolution. The classes were divided by mere misunderstanding, and on February 24, Lamartine christened the provisional government "une gouvernement qui suspends si malentendu terrible qui existe entre les différentes classes," a government that removes this terrible misunderstanding which exists between the different classes. From Lamartine's speech, 24 February 1848. The Paris proletariat reveled in this magnanimous intoxication of fraternity. The provisional government, for its part, once it was compelled to proclaim the republic, did everything made it acceptable to the bourgeoisie and to the provinces. The bloody terror of the first French republic was disavowed by the abolition of the death penalty for political offences. The press was open to all opinions, army, the courts, the administration remained with a few exceptions in the hands of their old dignitaries. None of the July monarchy's great offenders was brought to book. The bourgeois republicans of the national amused themselves by exchanging monarchist names and costumes for old republican ones. To them the republic was only a new ball dress for the old bourgeois society. The young republic sought its chief merit not in frightening, but rather in constantly taking fright itself, and in winning existence and disarming resistance by soft compliance and non-resistance. At home to the privileged classes, abroad to the despotic powers, it was loudly announced that the republic was of peaceful nature. Live and let live was its professed motto. In addition to that, shortly after the February Revolution, the Germans, Poles, Austrians, Hungarians, and Italians revolted, each people in accordance with its immediate situation. Russia and England, the latter itself agitated, the former cowed, were not prepared. The republic therefore had no national enemy to face. Consequently, there were no great foreign complications which could fire the energies, hasten the revolutionary process, drive the provisional government forward, or throw it overboard. The Paris proletariat, which looked upon the republic as its own creation, naturally acclaimed each act of the provisional government which facilitated the firm placement of the latter in bourgeois society. It willingly allowed itself to be employed on police service by Caussidière in order to protect property in Paris. Just as it allowed Louis Blanc to arbitrate wage disputes between workers and masters. It made it a point on earth to preserve the bourgeois honor of the Republic unblemished in the eyes of Europe. The Republic encountered resistance either abroad or home. This disarmed it. Its task was no longer the revolutionary transformation of the world, but consisted only in adapting itself to the relations of bourgeois society. To the fanaticism with which the provisional government undertook this task, there is no more eloquent testimony than its financial measures. Public credit and private credit were naturally shaken. Public credit rests on confidence that the state will allow itself to be exploited by the wolves of finance. But the old state had vanished and the revolution was directed above all against the finance aristocracy. The vibrations of the last European commercial crisis had not yet ceased. Bankruptcy still followed bankruptcy. Private credit was therefore paralyzed, circulation restricted, production at a standstill before the February Revolution broke out. The revolutionary crisis increased the commercial crisis, and if private credit rests on confidence that bourgeois production in the entire scope of its relations, the bourgeois order, will not be touched, will remain inviolate. What effect must a revolution have had which questioned the basis of bourgeois production, the economic slavery of the proletariat, which set up against the bourse the Sphinx of Luxembourg? The uprising of the proletariat is the abolition of bourgeois credit, for it is the abolition of bourgeois production and its order. Public credit and private credit are the economic thermometer by which the intensity of a revolution can be measured. The more they fall, the more the fervor and generative power of the revolution rises. The provisional government wanted to strip the republic of its anti-bourgeois appearance, and so it had, above all, to try to peg the exchange value of this new form of state, its quotation on the bourse. Private credit necessarily rose again, together with the current bourse quotation of the republic, in order to allay the very suspicion that it would not or could not honor the obligations assumed by the monarchy. In order to build up confidence in the republic's bourgeois morality and capacity to pay, the provisional government took refuge in braggadocio as undignified as it was childish. In advance of the legal date of payment, it paid out the interest on the 5%, 4.12%, and 4% bonds to the state creditors. The bourgeois aplomb, the self-assurance of the capitalists, suddenly awoke when they saw the anxious haste with which this government sought to buy their confidence. The financial embarrassment of the provisional government was naturally not lessened by a theatrical stroke which robbed it of its stock of ready cash. The financial pinch could no longer be concealed, and petty bourgeois, domestic servants, and workers had to pay for the pleasant surprise which had been prepared for the state creditors. It was announced that no more money could be drawn on savings bank books for an amount of over 100 francs. The sums deposited in the savings banks were confiscated and by decree transformed into an irredeemable state debt. This embittered the already hard-pressed petty bourgeois against the republic, since he received state debt certificates in place of his savings bank books. He was forced to go to bourse in order to sell them, and thus deliver himself directly into the hands of the bourse jobbers against whom he had made the February Revolution. The finance aristocracy, which ruled under the July monarchy, had its high church in the bank. Just as the bourse governs state credit, the bank governs commercial credit. Directly threatened not only in its rule but in its very existence by the February Revolution, the bank tried from the outset to discredit the republic by making the lack of credit general. It suddenly stopped the credits of the bankers, the manufacturers, and the merchants. As it did not immediately call for the counter-revolution, this maneuver necessarily reacted on the bank itself. The capitalists drew out the money they had deposited in the vaults of the bank, the possessors of the bank. Notes rushed to the pay office in order to exchange them for gold and silver. The provisional government could have forced the bank into bankruptcy without forcible interference. In a legal manner, it would have had only to remain passive and leave the bank to its fate. The bankruptcy of the bank would have been the deluge which in an instant would have swept from French soil the finance aristocracy, the most powerful and dangerous enemy of the republic, the golden pedestal of the July monarchy. And once the bank was bankrupt, the bourgeoisie itself would have had to regard it as a last desperate attempt at rescue, if the government had formed a national bank and subjected national credit to the control of the nation. All the provisional government, on the contrary, fixed a compulsory quotation for the notes of the bank. It did more. It transformed provincial banks into branches of the Bank of France and allowed it to cast its net over the whole of France. Later, it pledged the state force to the bank as a guarantee for a loan contracted from it. In this way, the February Revolution directly strengthened and enlarged the bankocracy which it should have overthrown. Meanwhile, the provisional government was writhing under the incubus of a growing deficit. In vain it begged for patriotic sacrifices. Only the workers threw at their alms. Recourse had to be had to a heroic measure, to the imposition of a new tax. But who was to be taxed? The bourse wolves, the bank kings, the state creditors, the rentiers, the industrialists? That was not the way to ingratiate the republic with the bourgeoisie. That would have meant on the one hand to endanger state credit and commercial credit, while on the other, attempts were made to purchase them with such great sacrifices and humiliations. But someone had to fork over the cash. Who was sacrificed to bourgeois credit? Jacques Le Bonhomme, the peasant. The provisional government imposed an additional tax of 45 cents times to the franc on the 4 direct taxes. The government press cajoled the Paris proletariat into believing that this tax would fall chiefly on the big landed proprietors, on the possessors of the milliard granted by the Restoration. But in truth, it hit the peasant class above all, that is, the large majority of the French people. They had to pay the cost of the February Revolution. In them, the counter-revolution gained its main material. The 45-cent time tax was a question of life and death for the French peasant. He made a life and death question for the republic. From that moment, the republic meant to the French peasant the 45-cent time tax, and he saw in the Paris proletariat the spendthrift who did himself well at his expense. Whereas the revolution of 1789 began by shaking the feudal burdens off the peasants, the revolution of 1848 announced itself to the rural population by the imposition of a new tax. In order not to endanger capital and to keep its state machine going, there was only one means by which the provisional government could set aside all these inconveniences and jerk the state out of its old rut, a declaration of state bankruptcy. Everyone recalls how Liddell rolled in the National Assembly subsequently described the virtuous indignation with which he repudiated this presumptuous proposal of the bourse Jew, Fould, now French finance minister. Fould had handed him the apple from the tree of knowledge. By honoring the bills drawn on the state by the old bourgeois society, the provisional government succumbed to the latter. It had become the hard-pressed debtor of bourgeois society, instead of confronting it as the pressing creditor that had to collect the revolutionary debts of many years. It had to consolidate the shaky bourgeois relationships in order to fulfill obligations which are only to be fulfilled within these relationships. Credit became a condition of life for it, and the concessions to the proletariat, the promises made to it, became so many fetters which had to be struck off. The emancipation of the workers, even as a phrase, became an unbearable danger to the new republic, for it was a standing protest against the restoration of credit, which rests on undisturbed and untroubled recognition of the existing economic class relations. Therefore, it was necessary to have done with the workers. The February Revolution had cast the army out of Paris. The National Guard, that is, the bourgeoisie in its different gradations, constituted the sole power. Alone, however, it did not feel itself a match for the proletariat. Moreover, it was forced gradually and piecemeal to open its ranks and admit armed proletarians, albeit after the most tenacious resistance, and after setting up 100 different obstacles. There consequently remained but one way out, to play off part of the proletariat against the other. For this purpose, the provisional government formed 24 battalions of mobile guards, each 1,000 strong, composed of young men from 15 to 20 years old. They belonged for the most part to the lumpen proletariat, which in all big towns forms a mass sharply differentiated from the industrial proletariat, a recruiting ground for thieves and criminals of all kinds living on the crumbs of society, people without a definite trade, vagabonds, gens sans feu et sans avu, varying according to the degree of civilization of the nation to which they belong, but never renouncing their Lazaronic character, at the youthful age at which the provisional government recruited them, thoroughly malleable, as capable of the most heroic deeds and the most exalted sacrifices as of the basest banditry and the foulest corruption. The provisional government paid them 1 franc 50 cents a day. That is, it bought them. It gave them their own uniform. That is, it made them outwardly distinct from the blouse-wearing workers. In part, it assigned officers from the standing army as their leaders. In part, they themselves elected young sons of the bourgeoisie, whose rhodomontades about death for the fatherland and devotion to the republic captivated them. And so the Paris proletariat was confronted with an army, drawn from its own midst of 24,000 young, strong, foolhardy men. It gave cheers for the mobile guard on its marches through Paris. It acknowledged it to be its foremost fighters on the barricades. It regarded it as the proletarian guard in contradistinction to the bourgeois national guard. Its error was pardonable. Besides the mobile guard, the government decided to rally around itself an army of industrial workers. 100,000 workers, thrown on the streets by the crisis and the revolution, were enrolled by the Minister Marie in so-called national ateliers. Under this grandiose name hid nothing else than the employment of the workers on tedious, monotonous, unproductive earthworks at a wage of 23 sous. English workhouses in the open. That is what these national ateliers were. The provisional government believed that it had formed in them a second proletarian army against the workers themselves. This time the bourgeoisie was mistaken in the national ateliers, just as the workers were mistaken in the mobile guard. It had created an army for mutiny, but one purpose was achieved. National ateliers was the name of the people's workshops which Louis Blanc preached in the Luxembourg Palace. Marie's ateliers, devised in direct antagonism to the Luxembourg, offered occasion, thanks to the common label, for a comedy of errors worthy of the Spanish servant farce. The provisional government itself surreptitiously spread the report that these national ateliers were the discovery of Louis Blanc, and this seemed the more plausible because Louis Blanc, the prophet of the national ateliers, was a member of the provisional government. And in the half-naive, half-intentional confusion of the Paris bourgeoisie, in the artificially molded opinion of France, of Europe, these workhouses were the first realization of socialism, which was put in the pillory with them. In their appellation, though not in their content, the national ateliers were the embodied protest of the proletariat against bourgeois industry, bourgeois credit, and the bourgeois republic. The whole hate of the bourgeoisie was therefore turned upon them. It had found in them simultaneously the point against which it could direct the attack. As soon as it was strong enough to break openly with the February illusions, all the discontent, all the ill humor of the petty bourgeois too was directed against these national ateliers, the common target. With real fury, they totted up the money the proletarian loafers swallowed up, while their own situation was becoming daily more unbearable. A state pension for sham labor, so that's socialism. They grumbled to themselves. They sought the reason for their misery in the national ateliers, the declamations of the Luxembourg, the processions of the workers through Paris, and no one was more fanatic about the alleged machinations of the communists than the petty bourgeoisie, who hovered hopelessly on the brink of bankruptcy. Thus, in the approaching melee between bourgeoisie and proletariat, all the advantages, all the decisive posts, all the middle strata of society were in the hands of the bourgeoisie. At the same time as the waves of the February Revolution rose high over the whole continent, and each new post brought a new bulletin of revolution, now from Italy, now from Germany, now from the remotest parts of southeastern Europe, and maintains the general ecstasy of the people, giving it constant testimony of a victory that it had already forfeited. March 17 and April 16 were the first skirmishes in the big class struggle which the bourgeois republic hid under its wing. 17 revealed March the proletariat's ambiguous situation, which permitted no decisive act. Its demonstration originally pursued the purpose of pushing the provisional government back onto the path of revolution, of effecting the exclusion of its bourgeois members according to circumstances, and of compelling the postponement of the elections for the National Assembly and the National Guard. But on March 16th, the bourgeoisie represented in the National Guard staged a hostile demonstration against the provisional government. With the cry "Boss Le Rollin," it surged to the Hotel de Ville, and the people were forced on March 17th to shout, "Long live Le Rollin! Long live the provisional government!" They were forced to take sides against the bourgeoisie in support of the bourgeois republic, which seemed to them to be in danger. They strengthened the provisional government instead of subordinating it to themselves. March 17th went off in a melodramatic scene, and whereas the Paris proletariat on this day once more displayed its giant body, the bourgeoisie both inside and outside the provisional government was all the more determined to smash it. April 16 was a misunderstanding engineered by the provisional government in alliance with the bourgeoisie. The workers had gathered in great numbers at the Champ de Mars and in the Hippodrome to choose their nominees to the general staff of the National Guard. Suddenly throughout Paris, from one end to the other, a rumor spread as quick as lightning, to the effect that the workers had met armed in the Champ de Mars under the leadership of Louis Blanc, Cabot, and Raspail, in order to march thence on the Hotel de Ville, overthrow the provisional government, and proclaim a communist government. The general alarm is sounded. Ledru, Rollin, Marrast, and Lamartine later contended for the honor of having initiated this. And in an hour 100,000 men are under arms. The Hotel de Ville is occupied at all points by the National Guard. The cry "Down with the communists! Down with Louis Blanc, with Raspail, with Cabot!" thunders throughout Paris. Innumerable deputations pay homage to the provisional government, all ready to save the fatherland and society. When the workers finally appear before the Hotel de Ville, in order to hand over to the provisional government a patriotic election they had made in the Champ de Mars, they learned to their amazement that bourgeois Paris has defeated their shadow in a very carefully calculated sham battle. The terrible attempt of April 16 furnished the excuse for recalling the army to Paris, the real purpose of the clumsily staged comedy, and for the reactionary federalist provinces. Demonstrations in the on May 4th National Assembly met the result of the direct general elections convened. Universal suffrage did not possess the magic power which Republicans of the old school had ascribed to it. They saw in the whole of France at least in the majority of Frenchmen, citoyens with the same interests, the same understanding, etc. This was their cult of the people. Instead of their imaginary people, the elections brought the real people to the light of day, that is, representatives of the different classes into which it falls. We have seen why peasants and petty bourgeois had to vote under the leadership of a bourgeoisie spoiling for a fight, and of big landowners frantic for restoration. But if universal suffrage was not the miracle working, magic wand the Republican worthies had taken it for, it possessed the incomparable higher merit of unchaining the class struggle, of laying the various middle strata of bourgeois society rapidly over their illusions and disappointments, of tossing all the sections of the exploiting class at one throw to the apex of the state, and thus tearing from them their deceptive mask, whereas the monarchy with its property qualifications had let only certain factions of the bourgeoisie compromise themselves, allowing the others to lie hidden behind the scenes and surrounding them with the halo of a common opposition. In the Constituent National Assembly which met on May 4th, the bourgeois Republicans, the Republicans of the National, had the upper hand. Even legitimists and Orleanists at first dared to show themselves only under the mask of bourgeois republicanism. The fight against the proletariat could be undertaken only in the name of the Republic. The Republic dates from May 4, not from February 25. That is, the Republic recognized by the French people. It is not the Republic which the Paris proletariat thrust upon the provisional government, not the Republic with social institutions, not the vision that hovered before the fighters on the barricades. The Republic proclaimed by the National Legitimate Assembly, the sole Republic, is a Republic which is no revolutionary weapon against the bourgeois order, but rather its political reconstitution. The political reconsolidation of bourgeois society, in a word, a bourgeois republic. This contention resounded from the tribune of the National Assembly, and in the entire Republican and anti-Republican bourgeois press it found its echo. And we have seen how the February Republic in reality was not and could not be other than a bourgeois republic. How the provisional government nevertheless was forced by the immediate pressure of the proletariat to announce it as a republic with social institutions. How the Paris proletariat was still incapable of going beyond the bourgeois republic otherwise than in its fancy. In imagination, how even when the republic acted in the service of the bourgeoisie when it really came to action, how the promises made to it became an unbearable danger for the new republic. How the whole life process of the provisional government was comprised in a continuous fight against the demands of the proletariat. In the National Assembly, all France sat in judgment upon the Paris proletariat. The Assembly broke illusions of the February Revolution. It roundly proclaimed the bourgeois republic, nothing but the bourgeois republic. It at once excluded the representatives of the proletariat, Louis Blanc and Albert, from the executive commission it had appointed. It threw out the proposal of a special labor ministry and received with acclamation the statement of Minister Gillette. The question now is merely one of bringing labor back to its old conditions. But all this was not enough. The February Republic was won by the workers with the passive support of the bourgeoisie. The proletarians rightly regarded themselves as the victors of February, and they made the arrogant claims of victors. They had to be vanquished in the streets. They had to be shown that they were worsted as soon as they did not fight with the bourgeoisie but against the bourgeoisie. Just as the February Republic with its socialist concessions required a battle of the proletariat, united with the bourgeoisie against the monarchy. So a second battle was necessary to sever the republic from socialist concessions, to officially work out the bourgeois republic as dominant. The bourgeoisie had to refute, arms in hand, the demands of the proletariat. And the real birthplace of the bourgeois republic is not the February victory, it is the June defeat. The proletariat hastened the decision when, on the 15th of May, it pushed its way into the National Assembly, sought in vain to recapture its revolutionary influence, and only delivered its energetic leaders to the jailers of the bourgeoisie. Il faut en finir. This situation must end. With this cry, the National Assembly gave vent to its determination to force the proletariat into a decisive struggle. The Executive Commission issued a series of provocative decrees, such as that prohibiting congregations of people, etc. The workers were directly provoked, insulted, and derided from the tribune of the Constituent National Assembly. But the real point of the attack was, as we have seen, the national players. The Constituent Assembly imperiously pointed these out to the Executive Commission, which waited only to hear its own plan proclaim the command of the National Assembly. The Executive Commission began by making admission to the national players more difficult, by turning the day wage into a peace wage, by banishing workers not born in Paris to the Salon, ostensibly for the construction of earthworks. These earthworks were only a rhetorical formula with which to embellish their turning disillusioned, announced to their comrades. Finally, on June 21, a decree appeared in the Moniteur which ordered the forcible expulsion of all unmarried workers from the national players or their enrollment in the army. The workers were left no choice. They had to starve or let fly. They answered on June 22 with a tremendous insurrection in which the first great battle was fought between the two classes that split modern society. It was a fight for the preservation or annihilation of the bourgeois order. The veil that shrouded the republic was torn asunder. It is well known how the workers, with unexampled bravery and ingenuity, without leaders, without a common plan, without means, and for the most part lacking weapons, held in check for 5 days the army, the mobile guard, the Paris National Guard, and the National Guard that streamed in from the provinces. It is well known how the bourgeoisie compensated itself for the mortal anguish it suffered by unheard of brutality, massacring over 3,000 prisoners. The official representatives of French democracy were steeped in Republican ideology to such an extent that it was only some weeks later that they began to have an inkling of the significance of the June fight. They were stupefied by the gunpowder smoke in which the fantastic republic dissolved. The immediate impression which the news of the June defeat made on us, the reader will allow us to describe in the words of the Ne Rheinische Zeitung. The executive committee, that last official vestige of the February Revolution, vanished like a ghost in the face of these grave events. Lamartine's fireworks have turned into the incendiary shells of Cavaignac. Fraternite, the brotherhood of antagonistic classes, one of which exploits the other, this fraternity which in February was proclaimed and inscribed in large letters on the facades of Paris on every prison and every barracks. This fraternity found its true, unadulterated, and prosaic expression in civil war in its most terrible aspect. The war of labor against capital. This brotherhood blazed in front of the windows of Paris on the evening of June 25, when the Paris of the bourgeoisie held illuminations while the Paris of the proletariat was burning, bleeding, groaning in the throes of death. This fraternite lasted only as long as there was a consanguinity of interest between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Pedants, sticking to the old revolutionary tradition of 1793, socialist doctrinaires who begged alms for the people from the bourgeoisie and who were allowed to deliver lengthy sermons and compromise themselves so long as the proletarian lion had to be lulled to sleep. Republicans who wanted to keep the old bourgeois order in toto, but without the crowned head. Members of the dynastic opposition on whom chance imposed the task of bringing about the downfall of a dynasty instead of a change of government. Legitimists, who did not want to cast off their livery but merely to change its style. These were the allies with whom the people had fought their February Revolution. What the people instinctively hated in Louis Philippe was not Louis Philippe himself, but the crowned rule of class, the capital on the throne. But magnanimous as always, the people thought they had destroyed their enemy when they had overthrown the enemy of their enemies, their common enemy. The February Revolution was a nice revolution, the revolution of universal sympathies, because the contradictions which erupted in it against the monarchy were still undeveloped and peacefully dormant. Because the social struggle which formed their background had only achieved an ephemeral existence, an existence in phrases, in words. The June Revolution is the ugly revolution, the nasty revolution. Because the phrases have given place to the real thing. Because the republic has bared the head of the monster by knocking off the crown which shielded and concealed it. Order! Order! We shouted Guizot's war cry. Sebastiani, the Guizotist when Warsaw became Russian. Order! Shouts Cavaignac, the brutal echo of the French National Assembly and of the Republican bourgeoisie. Order! Thundered his grape, shot as it tore into the body of the proletariat. None of the numerous revolutions of the French bourgeoisie since 1789 assailed the existing order, for they retained the class rule, the slavery of the workers, the bourgeois system, even though the political form of this rule and this slavery changed frequently. The June uprising did assail the system. Woe to the June uprising! Woe to that June! Re-echoes Europe. The Paris proletariat was forced into the June insurrection by the bourgeoisie. This sufficed to mark its doom. Its immediate avowed needs did not drive it to engage in a fight for the forcible overthrow of the bourgeoisie, nor was it equal to this task. The Moniteur had to inform it officially that the time was past when the republic saw any occasion to bow and stray to its illusions, and only its defeat convinced it of the truth. that the slightest improvement in its position remains a utopia within the bourgeois republic, a utopia that becomes a crime as soon as it wants to become a reality. In place of the demands, exuberant in form but still limited and even bourgeois in content, whose concession the proletariat wanted to bring from the February Republic, there appeared the bold slogan of revolutionary struggle: overthrow of the bourgeoisie, dictatorship of the working class, by making its burial place the birthplace of the bourgeois republic. The proletariat compelled the latter to come out forth within its pure form as a state whose admitted objective is to perpetuate the rule of capital, the slavery of labor. Having constantly before its eyes the scarred, irreconcilable, invincible enemy, invincible because its existence is the condition of its own life, bourgeois rule, freed from all fetters, was bound to turn immediately into bourgeois terrorism. With the proletariat removed for the time being from the stage, and bourgeois dictatorship recognized officially, the middle strata of bourgeois society, the petty bourgeoisie and the peasant class, had to adhere more and more closely to the proletariat as their position became more unbearable and their antagonism to the bourgeoisie more acute. Just as earlier they had to find the cause of their distress in its upsurge, so now in its defeat. If the June insurrection raised the self-assurance of the bourgeoisie all over the continent, and caused it to league itself openly with the feudal monarchy against the people, who was the first victim of this alliance is the continental bourgeoisie itself. The June defeat prevented it from consolidating its rule, and from bringing the people, half satisfied and half out of humor, to a standstill at the lowest stage of the bourgeois revolution. Finally, the defeat of June divulged to the despotic powers of Europe the secret that France must maintain peace abroad at any price and order to be able to wage civil war at home. Thus, the peoples who had begun the fight for their national independence were abandoned to the superior power of Russia, Austria, and Prussia. But at the same time, the fate of these national revolutions was made subject to the fate of the proletarian revolution, and they were robbed of their apparent autonomy, their independence of the great social revolution. The Hungarian shall not be free, nor the Pole, nor the Italian, as long as the worker remains a slave. Finally, with the victories of the Holy Alliance, Europe has taken on a form that makes every fresh proletarian upheaval in France directly coincide with the World War. The new French Revolution is forced to leave its national soil forthwith and conquer the European terrain, on which alone the social revolution of the 19th century can be accomplished. Thus, only the June defeat has created all the conditions under which France can seize the initiative of the European Revolution. Only after being dipped in the blood of the June insurgents did the tricolor become the flag of the European Revolution, the red flag. And we exclaim, the revolution is dead, long live the revolution. Part 2. From June 1848 to June 13, 1849, February 25, 1848, granted the Republic to France. June 25 thrust the revolution upon her. And revolution after June meant overthrow of bourgeois society, whereas before February it meant overthrow of the form of government. The June fight was led by the Republican faction of the bourgeoisie, with victory political power necessarily fell to its share. The state of siege lay gagged Paris, unresisting, at its feet, and in the provinces there prevailed a moral state of siege, the threatening, brutal arrogance of victorious bourgeoisie and the unleashed property fanaticism of the peasants. No danger therefore from below. The crash of the revolutionary might of the workers was simultaneously a crash of the political influence of the democratic Republicans. That is, of the Republicans in the sense of the petty bourgeoisie represented in the executive commission by Ledger Rollin, in the Constituent National Assembly by the part of the Montaigne, and in the press by the Reform. Together with the bourgeois Republicans, they had conspired on April 16 against the proletariat. Together with them, they had warred against it in the June days. Thus they themselves blasted the background against which their party stood out as a power. For the petty bourgeoisie can preserve a revolutionary attitude toward the bourgeoisie only as long as the proletariat stands behind it. The proletarians were dismissed. The sham alliance which the bourgeois Republicans reluctantly and with reservations concluded with them during the epoch of the provisional government and the executive commission was openly broken by the bourgeois Republicans. Spurned and repulsed as allies, they sank down to subordinate henchmen of the tricolor men, from whom they could not wring any concessions, but whose domination they had to support whenever it, and with it the Republic seemed to be put in jeopardy by the anti-Republican bourgeois factions. Lastly, these factions, the Orleanists and the Legitimists, were from the very beginning a minority in the Constituent National Assembly. Before the June days, they dared to react only under the mask of bourgeois republicanism. The June victory allowed for a moment the whole of bourgeois France to greet its savior in Cavaignac. And when shortly after the June days, the anti-Republican party regained independence, the military dictatorship and the state of siege in Paris permitted it to put out its antennae only very timidly and cautiously. Since 1830, the bourgeois Republican faction, in the person of its writers, its spokesmen, its men of talent and ambition, its deputies, generals, bankers, and lawyers, had grouped itself around a Parisian journal, the National. In the provinces, this journal had its branch newspapers. The coterie of the National was the dynasty of the tricolor republic. It immediately took possession of all state offices of the ministries, the prefecture of police, the post office directorship, the prefectures, the higher army officer posts, which had now become vacant. At the head of the executive power stood its general. Cavaignac, its editor-in-chief, Marx, became permanent president of the Constituent National Assembly. As master of ceremonies, he at the same time did the honors in his salons of the respectable republic. Even revolutionary French writers, awed as it were by the Republican tradition, have strengthened the mistaken belief that the Royalists dominated the Constituent National Assembly. On the contrary, after the June days, the Constituent Assembly remained the exclusive representative of bourgeois republicanism, and emphasized this aspect all the more resolutely, the more the influence of the tricolor Republicans collapsed outside the Assembly. If the question was one of maintaining the form of the bourgeois republic, then the Assembly had the votes of the democratic Republicans at its disposal. If one of maintaining the content, then even its mode of speech no longer separated it from the royalist bourgeois factions, for it is the interests of the bourgeoisie, the material conditions of its class rule and class exploitation, that form the content of the bourgeois republic. Thus it was not royalism but bourgeois republicanism that was realized in the life and work of this Constituent Assembly, which in the end did not die, nor was killed, but decayed. Of state for the entire duration of its rule, for as long as it gave its grand performance on the proscenium. An unbroken sacrificial feast was being staged in the background. The continual sentencing by courts, martial of the captured June insurgents, or their deportation without trial. The Constituent Assembly had the tact to admit that in the June insurgents, it was not judging criminals but wiping out enemies. The first act of the Constituent National Assembly was to set up a commission of inquiry into the events of June and of May 15th, and into the part played by the Socialist and Democratic Party leaders during these days. The inquiry was directly aimed at Louis Blanc, Ledger Rollin, and Costadier. The bourgeois Republicans burned with impatience to rid themselves of these rivals. They could have entrusted the venting of their spleen to no more suitable object than M. Odilon Barrett, the former chief of the dynastic opposition, the incarnation of liberalism, the light grave, the thoroughly shallow person who not only had a dynasty to revenge, but even had to settle accounts with the revolutionists for thwarting his premiership. A sure guarantee of his relentlessness. This Barrett was therefore appointed chairman of the Commission of Inquiry, and he constructed a complete legal process against the February Revolution, which may be summarized thus: March 17th demonstration, April 16th conspiracy, May 15th attempt, June 23 civil war. Why did he not stretch his erudite criminologist researches as far back as February 24? The journal Des Abats inquired, that is, to the foundation of Rome. The origin of states gets lost in a myth that one may believe but may not discuss. Louis Blanc and Costadier were handed over to the courts. The National Assembly completed the work of purging itself, which it had begun on May 15th. The plan formed by the provisional government, and again taken up by Goucho, of taxing capital in the form of a mortgage tax was rejected by the Constituent Assembly. The law that limited the working day to 10 hours was repealed. Imprisonment for debt was once more introduced. The large section of the French population that can neither read nor write was excluded from jury service. Why not from the franchise also? Journals again had to deposit caution money. The right of association was restricted. No one had fought more fanatically in the June days for the salvation of property and the restoration of credit than the Parisian. Petty bourgeois, keepers of cafes and restaurants, marchands de vin, small traders, shopkeepers, handicraftsmen, etc. The shopkeeper had pulled himself together and marched against the barricades in order to restore the traffic which leads from the streets into the shop. But behind the barricades stood the customers and the debtors. Before it, the creditors of the shop. And when the barricades were thrown down and the workers were crushed and the shopkeepers, drunk with victory, rushed back to their shops, they found the entrance barred by a savior of property, an official agent of credit who presented them with threatening notices. No one had fought more fanatically in the June days for the salvation of property and the restoration of credit than the Parisian. The plan formed by the provisional government, and again taken up by Goucho, of taxing capital in the form of a mortgage tax was rejected by the Constituent Assembly. The law that limited the working day to 10 hours was repealed. Imprisonment for debt was once more introduced. The large section of the French population that can neither read nor write was excluded from jury service. Why not from the franchise also? Journals again had to deposit caution money. The right of association was restricted. No one had fought more fanatically in the June days for the salvation of property and the restoration of credit than the Parisian. Even revolutionary French writers, awed as it were by the Republican tradition, have strengthened the mistaken belief that the Royalists dominated the Constituent National Assembly. On the contrary, after the June days, the Constituent Assembly remained the exclusive representative of bourgeois republicanism, and it emphasized this aspect all the more resolutely. The more the influence of the tricolor Republicans collapsed outside the Assembly. If the question was one of maintaining the form of the bourgeois republic, then the Assembly had the votes of the democratic Republicans at its disposal. If one of maintaining the content, then even its mode of speech no longer separated it from the royalist bourgeois factions, for it is the interests of the bourgeoisie, the material conditions of its class rule and class exploitation, that form the content of the bourgeois republic. Thus it was not royalism but bourgeois republicanism that was realized in the life and work of this Constituent Assembly, which in the end did not die, nor was killed, but decayed. of state for the entire duration of its rule for as long as it gave its grand performance on the proscenium. An unbroken sacrificial feast was being staged in the background. The continual sentencing by courts, martial of the captured June insurgents or their deportation without trial. The Constituent Assembly had the tact to admit that in the June insurgents it was not judging criminals but wiping out enemies. The first act of the Constituent National Assembly was to set up a commission of inquiry into the events of June and of May 15th, and into the part played by the Socialist and Democratic Party leaders during these days. The inquiry was directly aimed at Louis Blanc, Ledger Rollin, and Costadier. The bourgeois Republicans burned with impatience to rid themselves of these rivals. They could have entrusted the venting of their spleen to no more suitable object than M. Odelon Barrett, the former chief of the dynastic opposition, the incarnation of liberalism, then a light grave, the thoroughly shallow person who not only had a dynasty to revenge, but even had to settle accounts with the revolutionists for thwarting his premiership. A sure guarantee of his relentlessness. This Barrett was therefore appointed chairman of the Commission of Inquiry, and he constructed a complete legal process against the February Revolution, which may be summarized thus: March 17th demonstration, April 16th conspiracy, May 15th attempt, June 23 civil war. Why did he not stretch his erudite criminologist researches as far back as February 24? The journal Des Abats inquired. That is, to the foundation of Rome. The origin of states gets lost in a myth that one may believe but may not discuss. Louis Blanc and Costadier were handed over to the courts. The National Assembly completed the work of purging itself, which it had begun on May 15th. The Commission of Inquiry, and he constructed a complete legal process against the February Revolution, which may be summarized thus: March 17th demonstration, April 16th conspiracy, May 15th attempt, June 23 civil war. Why did he not stretch his erudite criminologist researches as far back as February 24? The journal Des Abats inquired. That is, to the foundation of Rome. The origin of states gets lost in a myth that one may believe but may not discuss. Louis Blanc and Costadier were handed over to the courts. The National Assembly completed the work of purging itself, which it had begun on May 15th. Petty bourgeois, keepers of cafes and restaurants, marchands de vin, small traders, shopkeepers, handicraftsmen, etc. The shopkeeper had pulled himself together and marched against the barricades in order to restore the traffic which leads from the streets into the shop. But behind the barricades stood the customers and the debtors. Before it, the creditors of the shop. And when the barricades were thrown down and the workers were crushed and the shopkeepers, drunk with victory, rushed back to their shops, they found the entrance barred by a savior of property, an official agent of credit who presented them with threatening notices. Overdue promissory note, overdue house rent, overdue bond, doomed shop, doomed shopkeeper, salvation of property. But the house they lived in was not their property. The shop they kept was not their property. The commodities they dealt in were not their property. Neither their business, nor the plate they ate from, nor the bed they slept on belonged to them any longer. It was precisely from them that this property had to be saved. For the house owner who let the house, for the banker who discounted the promissory note, for the capitalist who made the advances in cash, for the manufacturer who entrusted the sale of his commodities to these retailers, for the wholesale dealer who had credited the raw materials to these handicraftsmen. Restoration of credit. But credit, having regained strength, proved itself a vigorous and jealous god. It turned the debtor who could not pay out of his four walls, together with wife and child, surrendered his sham property to capital, and threw the man himself into the debtor's prison, which had once more reared its head threateningly over the corpses of the June insurgents. The petty bourgeois saw with horror that by striking down the workers they had delivered themselves without resistance into the hands of their creditors. Their bankruptcy, which since February had been dragging on in chronic fashion and had apparently been ignored, was openly declared after June. Their nominal property had been left unassailed as long as it was a consequence to drive them to the battlefield in the name of property. Now that the great issue with the proletariat had been settled, the small matter of the epicure could in turn be settled. In Paris, the mass of overdue paper amounted to over 21 million francs, in the provinces over 1 million. The proprietors of more than 7,000 Paris firms had not paid their rent since February, while the National Assembly had instituted an inquiry into political guilt going as far back as the end of February. The petty bourgeois on their part now demanded an inquiry into civil debts up to February 24. They assembled en masse in the Bourse Hall and threateningly demanded on behalf of every businessman who could prove that his insolvency was due solely to the stagnation caused by the revolution and that his business had been in good condition on February 24 an extension of the term of payment by order of Commerce Court and the compulsory liquidation of creditors' claims in consideration of a moderate percentage payment. As a legislative proposal, this question was dealt with in the National Assembly in the form of concordats amiable. The Assembly vacillated. Then it suddenly learned that at the same time at the Port St. Denis, thousands of wives and children of the insurgents had prepared an amnesty petition. In the presence of the resurrected spectre of June, the petty bourgeoisie trembled, and the National Assembly retrieved its implacability. The concordats amiable, the amicable settlements between debtor and creditor, were rejected in their most essential points. Thus long after the democratic representatives of the petty bourgeois had been repulsed within the National Assembly by the Republican representatives of the bourgeoisie, this parliamentary breach received its civil, its real economic meaning by the petty bourgeois as debtors being handed over to the bourgeois as creditors. A large part of the former were completely ruined, and the remainder were allowed to continue their businesses only under conditions which made them absolute serfs of capital. On August 22nd, 1848, the National Assembly rejected the concordats amiable. On September 19th, 1848, in the midst of the state of siege, Prince Louis Bonaparte and the prisoner of Vincennes, the communist Raspail, were elected representatives of Paris. The bourgeoisie, however, elected the usurious money changer and Orleanist fool. From all sides at once, therefore, open declaration of war against the Constituent National Assembly, against bourgeois republicanism, against Cavaignac. It needs no argument to show how the mass bankruptcy of the Paris petty bourgeois was bound to produce after effects far transcending the circle of its immediate victims, and to convulse bourgeois commerce once more. While the state deficit was swollen anew by the costs of the June insurrection, and state revenues sank continuously through the hold up of production, the restricted consumption, and the decreasing imports, Cavaignac and the National Assembly could have recourse to no other expedient than a new loan, which forced them still further under the yoke of the finance aristocracy. While the petty bourgeois had harvested bankruptcy liquidation by order of court as the fruit of the June victory, Cavaignac's janissaries, the mobile guards, found their reward in the soft arms of the courtesans. And as the youthful saviors of society, they received all kinds of homage in the salons of Marrast, the knight of the tricolor, who served simultaneously as the amphitryon and the troubadour of the respectable republic. Meantime, this social favoritism and the disproportionately higher pay of the mobile guard embittered the army, while all those national illusions with which bourgeois republicanism, through its journal, the National, had been able to attach to itself a part of the army and peasant class under Louis Philippe vanished at the same time. The role of mediator which Cavaignac and the National Assembly played in North Italy and order together with England to betray to Austria one day of rule destroyed 18 years of opposition on the part of the National. No government was less national than that of the National, none more dependent on England, and under Louis Philippe, the National Daily Cato's dictum. Carthaginem esse delendam. None was more servile toward the Holy Alliance, and from Guizot the National had demanded the tearing up of the treaties of Vienna. The irony of history made Bastide, the ex-editor for Foreign Affairs of the National, Minister of Foreign Affairs of France, so that he might refute every one of his articles in every one of his dispatches. For a moment, the army and the peasant class had believed that, simultaneously with the military dictatorship, war abroad and gloire had been placed on the order of the day in France. But Cavaignac was not the dictatorship of the saber of bourgeois society, he was the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie by the saber. And of the soldier they now required only the gendarme. Under the stern features of antique republican resignation, Cavaignac concealed humdrum submission to the humiliating conditions of his bourgeois office. L'argent n'a pas de maître, money has no master, he as well as the Constituent Assembly in general idealized this old election cry of the third estate by translating it into political speech. The bourgeoisie has no king. The true form of its rule is the republic, and the great organic work of the Constituent National Assembly consisted in working out this form in producing a republican constitution. The rechristening of the Christian calendar as a republican one, of the saintly Bartholomew as the saintly Robespierre, made no more change in the wind than weather than this constitution made or was supposed to make in bourgeois society. Where it went beyond a change of costume, it put on record the existing facts. Thus it solemnly registered the fact of the republic, the fact of universal suffrage, the fact of a single sovereign national assembly in place of two limited constitutional chambers. Thus it registered and regulated the fact of the dictatorship of Cavaignac by replacing the stationary, irresponsible hereditary monarchy with an ambulatory, responsible, elected monarchy with a quadrennial presidency. Thus it elevated no less to an organic law the fact of the extraordinary powers with which the National Assembly, after the horrors of May 15th and June 25, had prudently invested its president in the interest of its own security. The remainder of the Constitution was a work of terminology. The royalist labels were torn off the mechanism of the old monarchy and Republican labels stuck on. Marrast, former editor-in-chief of the National, now editor-in-chief of the Constitution, acquitted himself of this academic task not without talent. The Constituent Assembly resembled a Chilean official who wanted to regulate property relations in land more firmly by a cadastral survey just at the moment when subterranean rumblings announced the volcanic eruption that was to hurl away the land from under his very feet. While in theory it accurately marked off the forms in which the rule of the bourgeoisie found Republican expression, in reality it held its own only by the abolition of all formulas, by force sans phrase, by the state of siege. 2 days before it began its work on the Constitution, it proclaimed an extension of the state of siege. Formerly constitutions had been made and adopted as soon as the social process of revolution had reached a point of rest. The newly formed class relationships had established themselves, and the contending factions of the ruling class had recourse to a compromise which allowed them to continue the struggle among themselves and at the same time to keep the exhausted masses of the people out of it. This Constitution, on the contrary, did not sanction any social revolution. It sanctioned the momentary victory of the old society over the revolution. The first draft of the Constitution, made before the June days, still contained the droit au travail, the right to work, the first clumsy formula wherein the revolutionary demands of the proletariat are summarized. It was transformed into the droit à l'assistance, the right to public relief, and what modern state does not feed its paupers in some form or other. The right to work is, in the bourgeois sense, an absurdity, a miserable, pious wish. But behind the right to work stands the power over capital. Behind the power over capital, the appropriation of the means of production, their subjection to the associated working class, and therefore the abolition of wage labor, of capital, and of their mutual relations. Behind the right to work stood the June insurrection. The Constituent Assembly, which in fact put the revolutionary proletariat corps la loi outside the law, had on principle to throw the proletariat's formula out of the Constitution. The law of laws had to pronounce its anathema upon the right to work. But it did not stop there, as Plato banned the poets from his republic, so it banished forever from his republic the progressive tax. And the progressive tax is not only a bourgeois measure which can be carried out within the existing relations of production to a greater or less degree. It was the only means of binding the middle strata of bourgeois society to the respectable republic, of reducing the state debt, of holding the anti-republican majority of the bourgeoisie in check. In the matter of the concordats alienable, the tricolor republicans had actually sacrificed the petty bourgeoisie to the big bourgeoisie. They elevated this isolated fact to a principle by the legal prohibition of a progressive tax. They put bourgeois reform on the same level as proletarian revolution. But what class then remained as the mainstay of their republic? The big bourgeoisie, and its mass was anti-republican. While it exploited the republicans of the national in order to consolidate again the old relations of economic life, it thought, on the other hand, of exploiting the once more consolidated social relations in order to restore the political forms that corresponded to them. As early as the beginning of October, Cavaignac felt compelled to make Dufour and Vivian, previously ministers of Louis Philippe, ministers of the Republic, however much the brainless Puritans of his own party growled and blustered. While the tricolor constitution rejected every compromise with the petty bourgeoisie and was unable to win the attachment of any new social element to the new form of government, it hastened, on the other hand, to restore its traditional inviolability to a body that constituted the most hard bitten and fanatical defender of the old state. It raised the irremovability of judges, which had been questioned by the provisional government, to an organic law. The one king whom it had removed rose again by the score in these irremovable inquisitors of legality. The French press has analyzed from numerous aspects the contradictions of Marx's constitution, for example, the coexistence of two sovereigns, the National Assembly and the President, etc. The comprehensive contradiction of this constitution, however, consists in the following. The class whose social slavery the constitution is to perpetuate proletariat peasantry, petty bourgeoisie puts in possession of political power through universal suffrage. And from the class whose old social power it sanctions, the bourgeoisie, it withdraws the political guarantees of its power. It forces the political rule of the bourgeoisie into democratic conditions, which at every moment help the hostile classes to victory and jeopardize the very foundations of bourgeois society. From the first group, it demands that they should not go forward from political to social emancipation. From the others, that they should not go back from social to political restoration. These contradictions perturb the bourgeois republicans little, to the extent that they ceased to be indispensable, and they were indispensable only as the protagonists of the old society against the revolutionary proletariat. They fell a few weeks after their victory from the position of a party to that of a coterie, and they treated the constitution as a big intrigue. What was to be constituted, and it was above all the rule of the coterie. The president was to be a protracted Cavaignac, the legislative assembly a protracted constituent assembly. They hoped to reduce the political power of the masses of the people to a semblance of power, and to be able to make sufficient play with this sham power itself to keep continually hanging over the majority of the bourgeoisie, the dilemma of the June days, realm of the national or realm of anarchy. The work on the constitution, which was begun on September 4th, was finished on October 23. On September 2nd, the Constituent Assembly had decided not to dissolve until the organic laws supplementing the constitution were enacted. Nonetheless, it now decided to bring to life the creation that was most peculiarly its own, the president, on December 4th, long before the circle of its own activity was closed. So was it of hailing, in the homunculus of the constitution, the son of his mother. As a precaution, it was provided that if none of the candidates received 2 million votes, the election should pass over from the nation to the Constituent Assembly. Feudal provisions. The first day of the realization of the constitution was the last day of the rule of the Constituent Assembly. In the abyss of the ballot box lay its sentence of death. It saw the son of his mother and found the nephew of his uncle. Saul Cavaignac slew 1 million votes, but David Napoleon slew 6 million. Saul Cavaignac was beaten 6 times over. December 10th, 1848 was the day of the peasant insurrection. Only from this day does the February of the French peasant state. The symbol that expressed their entry into the revolutionary movement. Clumsily cunning, knavishly naive, doltishly sublime, a calculated superstition, a pathetic burlesque, a cleverly stupid anachronism, a world historic piece of buffoonery, and an indecipherable hieroglyphic for the understanding of the civilized. This symbol bore the unmistakable physiognomy of the class that represents barbarism within civilization. The republic had announced itself to this class with a tax collector. It announced itself to the republic with the emperor. Napoleon was the only man who exhaustively represented the interests and the imagination of the peasant class, newly created in 1789. By writing his name on the frontispiece of the republic, it declared war abroad and the enforcing of its class interests at home. Napoleon was to the peasants not a person but a program. With banners, with beat of drums and blare of trumpets, they marched to the polling booths shouting, plus pots, abbas les riches, abbas la république, vive l'empereur. No more taxes, down with the rich, down with the republic, long live the emperor. Behind the emperor was hidden the peasant war. The republic that they voted down was the republic of the rich. December 10 was the coup d'état of the peasants, which overthrew the existing government. And from that day on, when they had taken the government from France and given a government to her, their eyes were fixed steadily on Paris. For a moment, active heroes of the revolutionary drama, they could no longer be forced back into the inactive and spineless role of the chorus. The other classes helped to complete the election victory of the peasants. To the proletariat, the election of Napoleon meant the deposition of Cavaignac, the overthrow of the Constituent Assembly, the dismissal of bourgeois republicanism, the cessation of the June victory. To the petty bourgeoisie, Napoleon meant the rule of the debtor of the creditor. For the majority of the big bourgeoisie, the election of Napoleon meant an open breach with the faction of which it had to make use for a moment against the revolution, but which became intolerable to it as soon as this faction sought to consolidate the position of the moment into a constitutional position. Napoleon, in place of Cavaignac, meant to this majority of the monarch, in place of the republic, the beginning of the royalist restoration, a sly hint at Orleans, the fleur de lis hidden beneath the violets. Lastly, the army voted for Napoleon against the mobile guard, against the peace idle for war. Thus it happened, as the Nourein Chizaitung stated, that the most simple-minded man in France acquired the most multifarious significance. Just because he was nothing, he could signify everything save himself. Meanwhile, different as the meaning of the name Napoleon might be in the mouths of the different classes. With this name, each wrote on his ballot: down with the party of the national, down with Cavaignac, down with the Constituent Assembly, down with the bourgeois republic. Minister Dufour publicly declared in the Constituent Assembly, December 10th is the 2nd February 24. Petty bourgeoisie and proletariat had voted en bloc for Napoleon in order to vote against Cavaignac and, by pooling their votes, to wrest the final decision from the Constituent Assembly. The more advanced sections of the two classes, however, put forward their own candidates. Napoleon was the collective name of all parties in coalition against the bourgeois republic. Ledru, Rollin, and Raspail were the proper names, the former of the democratic petty bourgeoisie, the latter of the revolutionary proletariat. The votes for Raspail, the proletarians and their socialist spokesman declared it loudly were to be merely a demonstration. So many protests against any presidency that is against the constitution itself. So many votes against Ledru Rollin, the first act by which the proletariat, as an independent political party, declared its separation from the Democratic Party. This party, on the other hand, the democratic petty bourgeoisie and its parliamentary representative. The Montagnes treated the candidature of Ledru Rollin with all the seriousness with which it is in the habit of solemnly duping itself. For the rest, this was its last attempt to set itself up as an independent party, as against the proletariat. Not only the Republican bourgeois party, but also the democratic petty bourgeoisie and its Montagnes were beaten on December 10th. France now possessed Napoleon side by side with Montaigne, proof that both were only the lifeless caricatures of the great realities whose names they bore. Louis Napoleon, with the emperor's hat and the eagle, parodied the old Napoleon no more miserably than Montaigne, with its phrases borrowed from 1793 and its demagogic poses, parodied the old Montaigne. Thus the traditional 1793 superstition was stripped off at the same time as the traditional Napoleon superstition. The revolution had come into its own only when it had won its own, its original name, and it could do that only when the modern revolutionary class, the industrial proletariat, came dominatingly into its foreground. One can say that December 10th dumbfounded Montaigne and caused it to grow confused in its own mind. If for no other reason than because that day laughingly cut short with a contemptuous peasant jest the classical analogy to the old revolution. On December 20, Cavaignac laid down his office and the Constituent Assembly proclaimed Louis Napoleon president of the Republic. On December 19th, the last day of its sole rule, it rejected the proposal for amnesty for the June insurgents, would revoking the decree of June 27, under which it had condemned 15,000 insurgents to deportation without judicial sentence. Not have meant revoking the June battle itself. Odilon Barrett, the last minister of Louis Philippe, became the first minister of Louis Napoleon. Just as Louis Napoleon dated his rule, not from December 10th, but from a decree of the Senate of 1804, so he found a prime minister who did not date his ministry from December 20, but from a royal decree of February 24. As the legitimate heir of Louis Philippe, Louis Napoleon mollified the change of government by retaining the old ministry, which moreover had not had time to be worn out, since it had not found time to embark upon life. The leaders of the royalist bourgeois factions advised him in this choice that the head of the old dynastic opposition, who had unconsciously constituted the transition to the republicans of the national, was still more fitted to constitute with full consciousness the transition from the bourgeois republic to the monarchy. Odilon Barrett was the leader of the one old opposition party which, always fruitlessly struggling for ministerial portfolios, had not yet been used up. In rapid succession, the revolution hurled all the old opposition parties to the top of the state, so that they would have to deny, to repudiate their old phrases not only in deeds but even in words, and might finally be flung all together, combined in a repulsive commixture, on the dung heap of history by the people. And no apostasy was spared this Barrett, this incarnation of bourgeois liberalism, who for 18 years had hidden the rascally vacuity of his mind behind the serious demeanor of his body. If at certain moments the far too striking contrast between the thistles of the present and the laurels of the past startled the man himself, one glance in the mirror gave him back his ministerial composure and human self-admiration. What beamed at him from the mirror was Guizot, whom he had always envied, who had always mastered him, Guizot himself, but Guizot with the Olympian forehead of Odilon. What he overlooked were the ears of Midas. The Barrett of February 24 first became manifest in the Barrett of December 20. Associated with him, the Orleanist and Voltairian was the legitimist and Jesuit Fallu, as minister of public worship. A few days later, the Ministry of Home Affairs was given to Leon Faucher, the Malthusian, law, religion, and political economy. The Ministry of Barrett contained all this, and in addition a combination of legitimists and Orleanists. Only the Bonapartist was lacking. Bonaparte still hid his longing to signify Napoleon, for Saint-Luc did not yet play Toussaint Louverture. The party of the national was immediately relieved of all the higher posts, where it had entrenched itself. The prefecture of police, the post office directorship, the procuratorship general, the mairie of Paris were all filled with old creatures of the monarchy. Changarnier, the legitimist, received the unified supreme command of the National Guard of the Department of the Seine, of the Mobile Guard, and the troops of the line of the First Military Division. Bugeaud, the Orleanist, was appointed commander-in-chief of the Alpine Army. This change of officials continued uninterrupted under the Barrett government. The first act of his ministry was the restoration of the old royalist administration. The official scene was at once transformed: scenery, costumes, speech, actors, supers, mutes, prompters. The position of the parties, the theme of the drama, the content of the conflict, the whole situation. Only the Permanent Constituent Assembly remained in its place. But from the hour when the National Assembly had installed Bonaparte Barrett, and Barrett France stepped out of the period of Republican Constitution into the period of the Constituted Republic. And what place was there for a Constituent Assembly in a Constituted Republic? After the earth had been created, there was nothing else for its creator to do but flee to heaven. The Constituent Assembly was determined not to follow his example. The National Assembly was the last asylum of the party of the bourgeois Republicans. If all levers of executive power had been wrested from it, was there not left to it constituent omnipotence? Its first thought was to hold under all circumstances the position of sovereignty it occupied, and thence to reconquer the lost ground. Once the Barrett ministry was displaced by a ministry of the National, the royalist personnel would have to vacate the palaces of the administration forthwith, and the tricolor personnel would triumphantly move in again. The National Assembly resolved on the overthrow of the ministry, and the ministry itself offered an opportunity for the attack, a better one than the Constituent Assembly itself could have invented. It will be remembered that for the peasants, Louis Bonaparte signified no more taxes. 6 days he sat in the president's chair, and on the 7th, on December 27, his ministry proposed the retention of the salt tax, whose abolition the provisional government had decreed. The salt tax shares with the wine tax the privilege of being the scapegoat of the old French financial system, particularly in the eyes of the country folk. The Barrett ministry could not have put into the mouth of the peasant's choice a more mordant epigram on his electors than the words restoration of the salt tax. With the salt tax, Bonaparte lost his revolutionary salt. The Napoleon of the peasant insurrection dissolved like an apparition, and nothing remained but the great unknown of royalist bourgeois intrigue. And not without intention did the Barrett ministry make this act of tactlessly rude disillusionment the first governmental act of the president. The Constituent Assembly for its part eagerly seized the double opportunity of overthrowing the ministry as against the elected choice of the peasantry, setting itself up as the representative of peasant interests. It rejected the proposal of the finance minister, reduced the salt tax to a third of its former amount, thus increasing by 60 million the state deficit of 560 millions. After this vote of no confidence, calmly awaited the resignation of the ministry. So little did it comprehend the new world that surrounded it and its own changed position. Behind the ministry stood the president, and behind the president stood 6 millions who had placed in the ballot box as many votes of no confidence in the Constituent Assembly. The Constituent Assembly gave the nation back its no confidence vote. Absurd exchange. It forgot that its votes were no longer legal tender. The rejection of the salt tax only matured the decision of Bonaparte and his ministry to finish the Constituent Assembly. There began that long duel which lasted the entire latter half of the life of the Constituent Assembly. January 29th, March 31st, and May 8th are the journeys, the great days of this crisis, just so many forerunners of June 13th. Frenchmen, for example, Louis Blanc, have construed January 29 as the date of the emergence of a constitutional contradiction, the contradiction between a sovereign, indissoluble National Assembly born of universal suffrage, and a president who, to go by the wording, was responsible to the Assembly, but who, to go by reality, was not only similarly sanctioned by universal suffrage, and in addition united in his own person, all the votes that were split up 100 times and distributed among the individual members of the National Assembly, but who was also in full possession of the whole executive power, above which the National Assembly hovered as a merely moral force. This interpretation of January 29 confuses the language of the struggle on the platform, through the press, and in the clubs with its real content. Louis Bonaparte as against the Constituent National Assembly. That was not one unilateral constitutional power as against another. That was not the executive power as against the legislative. That was the constituted bourgeois republic itself, as against the intrigues and ideological demands of the revolutionary faction of the bourgeoisie that had founded it, and was now amazed to find that its constituted republic looked like a restored monarchy, and now desired forcibly to prolong the constituent period with its conditions, its illusions, its language, and its personages, and to prevent the mature bourgeois republic from emerging in its complete and peculiar form. As the Constituent National Assembly represented Cavaignac, who had fallen back into its midst, so Bonaparte represented the legislative National Assembly that had not yet been divorced from him, that is, the National Assembly of the constituted bourgeois republic. The election of Bonaparte could become explicable only by putting in the place of the one name its manifold meanings, by repeating itself in the election of the new National Assembly. The mandate of the old was annulled by December 10th. Thus, on January 29, it was not the president and the National Assembly of the same republic that were face to face. It was the National Assembly of the republic that was coming into being, and the president of the republic that had come into being. Two powers that embodied quite different periods in the life process of the republic. The one, the small republican faction of the bourgeoisie that alone could proclaim the republic, wrest it from the revolutionary proletariat by street fighting and a reign of terror, and draft its ideal basic features in the Constitution. And the other, the whole royalist mass of the bourgeoisie that alone could rule in this constituted bourgeois republic, strip the Constitution of its ideological trimmings, and realize by its legislation and administration the indispensable conditions for the subjugation of the proletariat. The storm which broke on January 29 gathered its elements during the whole month of January. The Constituent Assembly wanted to drive the Barrett ministry to resign by its no confidence vote. The Barrett ministry, on the other hand, proposed to the Constituent Assembly that it should give itself a definitive no confidence vote, decide on suicide, and decree its own dissolution. On January 6, Ratto, one of the most obscure deputies, at the order of the ministry, brought this motion before the Constituent Assembly that in August had determined not to dissolve until it had enacted a whole series of organic laws supplementing the Constitution. Full, the ministerialist bluntly declared to it that its dissolution was necessary for the restoration of the deranged credit. And did it not derange credit when it prolonged the provisional stage, and with Barrett again called Bonaparte in question, and with Bonaparte the constituted republic Barrett the Olympian became a raving whirl into the prospect of seeing the premiership he had finally pocketed, which the Republicans had already withheld from him for 10 months, again torn from him after scarcely 2 weeks' enjoyment of it. Barrett, confronting this wretched assembly out, tyrannized the tyrant. His mildest words were, no future is possible with it. And actually it did represent only the past. It is incapable, he added ironically, of providing the republic with the institutions which are necessary for its consolidation. Incapable indeed. Its bourgeois energy was broken simultaneously with its exceptional antagonism to the proletariat, and with its antagonism to the royalists its republican exuberance lived anew. Thus it was doubly incapable of consolidating the bourgeois republic, which it no longer comprehended, by means of the corresponding institutions. Simultaneously with Ratto's motion, the ministry evoked a storm of petitions throughout the land, and from all corners of France came flying daily at the head of the Constituent Assembly bundles of billets due, in which it was more or less categorically requested to dissolve and make its will. The Constituent Assembly, on its side, called forth counter petitions in which it caused itself to be requested to remain alive. The election struggle between Bonaparte and Cavaignac was renewed as a petition struggle for and against the dissolution of the National Assembly. The petitions were to be belated commentaries on December 10th. This agitation continued during the whole of January. In the conflict between the Constituent Assembly and the President, the former could not refer back to the general election as its origin, for the appeal was from the Assembly to universal suffrage. It could base itself on no regularly constituted power, for the issue was the struggle against the legal power. It could not overthrow the ministry by no confidence votes, as it again essayed to do on January 6 and 26, for the ministry did not ask for its confidence. Only one possibility was left to it, that of insurrection. The fighting forces of the insurrection were the Republican part of the National Guard, the Mobile Guard, and the centers of the revolutionary proletariat, the clubs. The Mobile Guard, those heroes of the June days in December, formed the organized fighting force of the Republican faction of the bourgeoisie. Just as before June, the National Étayers had formed the organized fighting force of the revolutionary proletariat. As the Executive Commission of the Constituent Assembly directed its brutal attack on the National Étayers when it had to put an end to the now unbearable pretensions of the proletariat, so the Ministry of Bonaparte directed its attack on the Mobile Guard when it had to put an end to the now unbearable pretensions of the Republican faction of the bourgeoisie. It ordered the disbanding of the Mobile Guard. One half of it was dismissed and thrown on the street. The other was organized on monarchist instead of democratic lines, and its pay was reduced to the usual pay of troops of the line. The Mobile Guard found itself in the position of the June insurgents, and every day the press carried public confessions in which it admitted its blame for June and implored the proletariat to forgive it. And the clubs, from a moment when the Constituent Assembly in the person of Barrett called in question the President, and in the person of the President the constituted bourgeois republic. And in the person of the constituted bourgeois republic in general, all the constituent elements of the February Republic necessarily ranged themselves around it, all the parties that wished to overthrow the existing republic and by a violent retrograde process to transform it into a republic of their class interests and principles. The scrambled eggs were unscrambled, the crystallizations of the revolutionary movement had again become fluid. The republic that was being fought for was again the indefinite republic of the February days, the defining of which each party reserved to itself. For a moment the parties again took up their old February positions, without sharing the illusions of February. The tricolor Republicans on the National again leaned on the Democratic Republicans of the Reform and pushed them as protagonists into the foreground of the parliamentary struggle. The Democratic Republicans again leaned on the Socialist Republicans. On January 27, a public manifesto announced their reconciliation and union and prepared their insurrectional background in the clubs. The ministerial press rightly treated the tricolor Republicans of the National as the resurrected insurgents of June. In order to maintain themselves at the head of the bourgeois republic, they called in question the bourgeois republic itself. On January 26, Minister Faucher proposed a law on the right of association, the first paragraph of which read, "Clubs are forbidden." He moved that this bill immediately be discussed as urgent. The Constituent Assembly rejected the motion of urgency, and on January 27, Ledru Rollin put forward a proposition with 230 signatures appended to it to impeach the ministry for violation of the Constitution. The impeachment of the ministry at times when such an act was a tactless disclosure of the impotence of the judge, to wit, the majority of the chamber, or an impotent protest of the accuser against this majority itself. That was the great revolutionary trump that the latter-day Montaigne played from now on at each high spot of the crisis. Poor Montaigne, crushed by the weight of its own name, on May 15th Blanqui, Barbes, Raspal, etc., had attempted to break up the Constituent Assembly by forcing an entrance into its hall at the head of the Paris proletariat. Barrett prepared a moral May 15th for the same assembly when he wanted to dictate its self-dissolution, and close the hall. The same assembly had commissioned Barrett to make the inquiry against the May accused, and now, at the moment when he appeared before it like a royalist Blanqui, when it sought for allies against him in the clubs, among the revolutionary proletarians, in the party of Blanqui, at this moment the relentless Barrett tormented it with the proposal to withdraw the May prisoners from the Court of Assizes with its jury and hand them over to the High Court, the hot court devised by the party of the National. Remarkable how wild fear for a ministerial portfolio could pound out of the head of a Barrett points worthy of a Beaumarchais. After much Vacillation, the National Assembly accepted his proposal. As against the makers of the May attempt, it reverted to its normal character. If the Constituent Assembly, as against the President and the Ministers, was driven to insurrection, the President and the Ministers, as against the Constituent Assembly, were driven to a coup d'état, for they had no legal means of dissolving it. But the Constituent Assembly was the mother of the Constitution, and the Constitution was the mother of the President. With the coup d'état, the President tore up the Constitution and extinguished his Republican legal title. He was then forced to pull out his imperial legal title, but the imperial legal title woke up the Orleanist legal title, and both paled before the legitimist legal title. The downfall of the legal republic could shoot to the top only its extreme antipode, the legitimist monarchy. At a moment when the Orleanist party was still only the vanquished of February and Bonaparte was still only the victor of December 10th. When both could oppose to Republican usurpation only their likewise usurped monarchist titles. The legitimists were aware of the propitiousness of the moment. They conspired openly. They could hope to find their monk in General Changarnier. The imminence of the white monarchy was as openly announced in their clubs as was that of the Red Republic and the proletarian clubs. All the ministry would have escaped difficulties by a happily suppressed rising. Legality is the death of us, cried Odilon Barrett. A rising would have allowed it, under the pretext of salad public, to dissolve the Constituent Assembly, to violate the Constitution in the interest of the Constitution itself. The brutal behavior of Odilon Barrett in the National Assembly, the motion for the dissolution of the clubs, the tumultuous removal of 50 tricolor prefects and their replacement by royalists, the dissolution of the mobile guard, the ill treatment of their chiefs by Changarnier, the reinstatement of Lerminier, the professor who was impossible even under Guizot, the toleration of the legitimist braggadocio, all these were just so many provocations to mutiny. But the mutiny remained mute. It expected its signal from the Constituent Assembly and not from the ministry. Finally came January 29, the day the decision was to be taken on the motion of Mathieu de la Drome for unconditional rejection of Ratto's motion. Legitimists, Orleanists, Bonapartists, Mobile Guard, Montagnier clubs, all conspired on this day, each just as the ostensible enemy as against the ostensible ally. Bonaparte, on horseback, mustered a part of the troops on the Place de la Concorde. Changarnier play acted with a display of strategic maneuvers. The Constituent Assembly found its building occupied by the military. This assembly, the center of all the conflicting hopes, fears, expectations, ferments, tensions, and conspiracies. This lion-hearted assembly did not falter for a moment when it came nearer to the Weltgeist than ever. It was like the fighter who not only feared to make use of his own weapons, but also felt himself obliged to maintain the weapons of his opponent unimpaired. Scorning death, it signed its own death warrant and rejected the unconditional rejection of the Ratto motion. Itself in a state of siege, it set limits to a constituent activity whose necessary frame had been the state of siege of Paris. It revenged itself worthily when on the following day it instituted an inquiry into the fright that the ministry had given it on January 29. In this great comedy of intrigues, Montaigne showed its lack of revolutionary energy and political understanding by allowing itself to be used by the party of the National as a crier in the contest. The party of the National had made its last attempt to continue to maintain in the constituted republic the monopoly of rule it had possessed during the inchoate period of the bourgeois republic. It was shipwrecked. While in the January crisis it was a question of the existence of the Constituent Assembly. In the crisis of March 20 it was a question of the existence of the Constitution, there of the personnel of the National Party, here of its ideal. There is no need to point out that the respectable Republicans surrendered the exaltation of their ideology more cheaply than the worldly enjoyment of governmental power. On March 21st, Focher's bill against the right of association, the suppression of the clubs was on the order of the day in the National Assembly. Article 8 of the Constitution guarantees to all Frenchmen the right to associate. The prohibition of the clubs was therefore an unequivocal violation of the Constitution, and the Constituent Assembly itself was to canonize the profanation of its holy of holies. But the clubs, these were the gathering points, the conspiratorial seats of the revolutionary proletariat. The National Assembly had itself forbidden the coalition of the workers against its bourgeois, and the clubs, what were they but a coalition of the whole working class against the whole bourgeois class, the formation of a worker state against the bourgeois state? Were they not just so many constituent assemblies of the proletariat and just so many military detachments of revolt and fighting trim? What the Constitution was to constitute above all else was the rule of the bourgeoisie. By the right of association, the Constitution therefore could manifestly mean only associations that harmonized with the rule of the bourgeoisie, that is, with bourgeois order. If for reasons of theoretical propriety it expressed itself in general terms, were not the government and the National Assembly there to interpret and apply it in a special case? And if in the primeval epoch of the Republic the clubs actually were forbidden by the state of siege, had they not to be forbidden in the ordered constituted republic by the law? The tricolor Republicans had nothing to oppose to this prosaic interpretation of the Constitution but the high-flown phraseology of the Constitution. A section of them, Pagner, Duclair, etc., voted for the ministry and thereby gave it a majority. The others, with the Archangel Cavaignac and the father of the Church Maras at their head, retired. After the article on the prohibition of the clubs had gone through to a special committee room jointly with Ledru Rollin and the Montagnier, and held a council. The National Assembly paralyzed, it no longer had a quorum, was at the right time and Premier remembered in the committee room that the way from here led directly to the street and that it was no longer February 1849. The party of the National suddenly enlightened, returned to the National Assembly's hall of session. Behind it the Montagnier, duped once more. The latter, constantly tormented by revolutionary longings, just as constantly clutched at constitutional possibilities, and still felt itself more in place behind the bourgeois Republicans than in front of the revolutionary proletariat. Thus the comedy was played, and the Constituent Assembly itself had decreed that the violation of the letter of the Constitution was the only appropriate realization of its spirit. There was only one point left to settle: the relation of the constituted republic to the European Revolution, its foreign policy. On May 8, 1849, unwanted excitement prevailed in the Constituent Assembly, whose term of life was due to end in a few days. The attack of the French army on Rome, its repulse by the Romans, its political infamy and military disgrace. The foul assassination of the Roman Republic by the French Republic, the first Italian campaign of the Second Bonaparte, was on the order of the day. The Montaigne had once more played its great trump. Ledru Rollin had laid on the President's table the inevitable bill of impeachment against the ministry, and this time also against Bonaparte, for violation of the Constitution. The motive of May 8 was repeated later as the motive of June 13th. Let us get clear about the expedition to Rome. As early as the middle of November 1848, Cavaignac had sent a battle fleet to Civita Vecchia in order to protect the Pope, to take him on board and ship him over to France. The Pope was to consecrate the respectable republic and to ensure the election of Cavaignac as president. With the Pope, Cavaignac wanted to angle for the priests, with the priests for the peasants, and with the peasants for the presidency. The expedition of Cavaignac, an election advertisement in its immediate purpose, was at the same time a protest and a threat against the Roman Revolution. It contained an embryo France's intervention in favor of the Pope. This intervention on behalf of the Pope, in association with Austria and Naples against the Roman Republic, was decided at the first meeting of Bonaparte's ministerial council on December 23. Falou in the ministry that met the Pope in Rome, and in the Rome of the Pope. Bonaparte no longer needed the Pope in order to become the president of the peasants, but he needed the conservation of the Pope in order to conserve the peasants of the president. Their credulity had made him president. With faith they would lose credulity, and with the Pope faith. And the Orleanists and Legitimists in coalition, who ruled in Bonaparte's name. Before the king was restored, the power that consecrates kings had to be restored, apart from their royalism. Without the old Rome, subject to its temporal rule, no Pope. Without the Pope, no Catholicism. Without Catholicism, no French religion. And without religion, what would become of the old French society? The mortgage the peasant has on heavenly possessions guarantees. The mortgage the bourgeois has on peasant possessions. The Roman Revolution was therefore an attack on property, on the bourgeois order, dreadful as the June Revolution. Re-established bourgeois rule in France required the restoration of papal rule in Rome. Finally, to smite the Roman revolutionists was to smite the allies of the French revolutionists. The alliance of the counter-revolutionary classes in the constituted French Republic was necessarily supplemented by the alliance of the French Republic with the Holy Alliance, with Naples and Austria. The decision of the ministerial council on December 23 was no secret to the Constituent Assembly. On January 8, Ledru Rollin had interpellated the ministry about it. The ministry had denied it, and the National Assembly had proceeded to the order of the day. Did it trust the word of the ministry? We know it spent the whole month of January giving the ministry no confidence votes. But if it was part of the ministry's role to lie, it was part of the National Assembly's role to feign belief in its lie and thereby save Republican dehors. Meanwhile, Piedmont was beaten, Charles Albert had abdicated, and the Austrian army knocked at the gates of France. Ledru Rollin vehemently interpellated. The ministry proved that it had only continued in North Italy the policy of Cavaignac, and Cavaignac only the policy of the provisional government, that is of Ledru Rollin. This time it even reaped a vote of confidence from the National Assembly, and was authorized to occupy temporarily a suitable point in Upper Italy to give support to peaceful negotiations with Austria concerning the integrity of Sardinian territory and the question of Rome. It is known that the fate of Italy is decided on the battlefields of North Italy, hence Rome would fall with Lombardy and Piedmont, or France would have to declare war on Austria and thereby on the European counter-revolution. Did the National Assembly suddenly take the Barrett Ministry for the old Committee of Public Safety, or itself for the convention? Why then, the military occupation of a point in Upper Italy? This transparent veil covered the expedition against Rome. On April 14, 14,000 men sailed under Udine for Civita Vecchia. On April 16, the National Assembly voted the ministry a credit of 1,200,000 francs for the maintenance of a fleet of intervention in the Mediterranean Sea for 3 months. Thus it gave the ministry every means of intervening against Rome, while it adopted the pose of letting it intervene against Austria. It did not see what the ministry did, it only heard what it said. Such faith was not found in Israel. The Constituent Assembly had fallen into the position of not daring to know what the constituted republic had to do. Finally, on May 8, the last scene of the comedy was played. The Constituent Assembly urged the ministry to take swift measures to bring the Italian expedition back to the aim set for it. Bonaparte that same evening inserted a letter in the Moniteur in which he lavished the greatest appreciation on Oudinot. On May 11, the National Assembly rejected the bill of impeachment against the same Bonaparte and his ministry, and the Montaigne, which instead of tearing this web of deceit, De pieces took the parliamentary comedy tragically in order to play in it the role of Fouquier Tinville did not betray its natural petty bourgeois calf's hide under the barbed lion skin of the convention. The latter half of the life of the Constituent Assembly is summarized thus. On January 29, it admits that the royalist bourgeois factions are the natural superiors of the republic constituted by it. On March 21st, that the violation of the Constitution is its realization, and on May 11th, that the bombastically proclaimed passive alliance of the French Republic with the struggling peoples means its active alliance with the European counter-revolution. This miserable assembly left the stage after it had given itself the satisfaction, 2 days before its first birthday, May 4, of rejecting the motion of amnesty for the June insurgents. Its power shattered, held in deadly hatred by the people, repulsed, maltreated, contemptuously thrown aside by the bourgeoisie, whose tool it was, forced in the second half of its life to disavow the first, robbed of its republican illusions, without having created anything great in the past, without hope in the future, and with its living body dying bit by bit. It was able to galvanize its own courts into life only by continually recalling and living through the June victory. Over and over again, affirming itself by constantly repeated damnation of the damned. A vampire living on the blood of the June insurgents. It left behind a state deficit increased by the cost of the June insurrection, by the loss of the salt tax, by the compensation it paid the plantation owners for abolishing Negro slavery, by the cost of the Roman expedition, by the loss of the wine tax, whose abolition it resolved upon when already at its last gasp a malicious old man, happy to impose on his laughing heir a compromising debt of honor. With the beginning of March, the agitation for the election of the Legislative National Assembly had commenced. Two main groups opposed each other, the Party of Order and the Democratic Socialist or Red Party. Between the two stood the Friends of the Constitution, under which name the Tricolor Republicans of the National sought to put forward a party. The Party of Order was formed directly after the June days. Only after December 10 had allowed it to cast off the coterie of the National of the bourgeois Republicans was the secret of its existence. The coalition of Orleanists and Legitimists into one party disclosed. The bourgeois class fell apart into two big factions which alternately, the big landed proprietors under the restored monarchy and the finance aristocracy and the industrial bourgeoisie under the July monarchy had maintained a monopoly of power. Bourbon was the royal name for the predominant influence of the interests of the one faction. Orleans the royal name for the predominant influence of the interests of the other faction. The nameless realm of the republic was the only one in which both factions could maintain with equal power the common class. Interest without giving up their mutual rivalry. If the bourgeois republic could not be anything but the perfected and clearly expressed rule of the whole bourgeois class, could it be anything but the rule of the Orleanists supplemented by the Legitimists, and of the Legitimists? Supplemented by the Orleanists, the synthesis of the Restoration and the July monarchy. The bourgeois republicans of the National did not represent any large faction of their class resting on economic foundations. They possessed only the importance and the historical claim of having asserted under the monarchy, as against the two bourgeois factions that understood only their particular regime. The general regime of the bourgeois class, the nameless realm of the republic, which they idealized and embellished with antique arabesques, but in which above all they hailed the rule of their coterie. If the party of the National grew confused in its own mind when it described the royalists in coalition at the top of the republic founded by it, these royalists deceived themselves no less concerning the fact of their united rule. They did not comprehend that each of their factions regarded separately by itself was royalist. The product of their chemical combination had necessarily to be republican. That the white and the blue monarchy had to neutralize each other in the tricolor republic, forced by antagonism to the revolutionary proletariat and the transition classes thronging more and more around it as their center to summon their united strength and to conserve the organization of this united strength. Each faction of the Party of Order had to assert, as against the desire for restoration and the overweening presumption of the other, their joint rule, that is the republican form of bourgeois rule. Thus we find these royalists in the beginning believing in an immediate restoration, later preserving the republican form with foaming rage and deadly invective against it on their lips, and finally confessing that they can endure each other only in the republic and postponing the restoration indefinitely. The enjoyment of the united rule itself strengthened each of the two factions and made each of them still more unable and unwilling to subordinate itself to the other, that is, to restore the monarchy. The Party of Order directly proclaimed in its election program the rule of the bourgeois class, that is, the preservation of the life conditions of its rule, property, family, religion, order. Naturally it represented its class rule and the conditions of its class rule as the rule of civilization and as the necessary conditions of material production, as well as of the relations of social intercourse arising from it. The Party of Order had enormous money and resources at its command. It organized its branches throughout France. It had all the ideologists of the old society in its pay. It had the influence of the existing governmental power at its disposal. It possessed an army of unpaid vassals in the whole mass of petty bourgeois and peasants, who, still removed from the revolutionary movement, found in the high dignitaries of property the natural representatives of their petty prejudices. This party, represented throughout the country by countless petty kings, could punish the rejection of their candidates as insurrection, dismiss the rebellious workers, the recalcitrant farmhands, domestic servants, clerks, railway officials, copyists, all the functionaries civilly subordinate to it. Finally, here and there it could maintain the delusion that the Republican Constituent Assembly had prevented the Bonaparte of December 10 from manifesting his wonder-working powers. We have not mentioned the Bonapartists in connection with the Party of Order. They were not a serious faction of the bourgeois class, but a collection of old, superstitious invalids and young, unbelieving soldiers of fortune. The Party of Order was victorious in the elections. It sent a large majority to the Legislative Assembly. As against the coalesced counter-revolutionary bourgeois class, the sections of the petty bourgeoisie and peasant class already revolutionized naturally had to ally themselves with the high dignitary of revolutionary interests, the revolutionary proletariat. We have seen how the democratic spokesmen of the petty bourgeoisie in Parliament, that is the Montagne, were driven by parliamentary defeats to the socialist spokesmen of the proletariat, and how the actual petty bourgeoisie outside Parliament was driven by the concordats amiable, by the brutal enforcement of bourgeois interests, and by bankruptcy to the actual proletarians. On January 27, Montaigne and the socialists had celebrated their reconciliation. At the great banquet of February 1849, they repeated their act of union. The social and the democratic party, the party of the workers and that of the petty bourgeois, united to form the social democratic party, that is, the Red Party. Paralyzed for a moment by the agony that followed the June days, the French Republic had lived through a continuous series of feverish excitement since the raising of the state of siege, since October 14th. First the struggle for the presidency, then the struggle between the president and the Constituent Assembly, the struggle for the clubs, the trial of Borgias, which, in contrast with the petty figures of the president, the coalesced royalists, the respectable Republicans, the democratic Montaigne, and the socialist doctrines of the proletariat, caused the proletariat's real revolutionists to appear primordial monsters such as only a deluge leaves behind on the surface of society, or such as could only precede a social deluge, the election agitation, the execution of the Brea murders, the continual proceedings against the press, the violent interference of the government with the banquets by police action, the insolent royalist provocations, the exhibition of the portraits of Louis Blanc and Casadier on the pillory, the unbroken struggle between the constituted republic and the Constituent Assembly, which each moment drove the revolution back to its each moment made the victors the vanquished, and the vanquished the victors, and in an instant changed around the positions of the parties and the classes. Their separations and connections, the rapid march of the European counter-revolution, the glorious Hungarian fight, the armed uprisings in Germany, the Roman expedition, the ignominious defeat of the French army before Rome, in this vortex of the movement, in this torment of historical unrest, in this dramatic ebb and flow of revolutionary passions, hopes, and disappointments. The different classes of French society had to count their epochs of development. In development. Counted them in half centuries. A considerable part of the peasants and of the provinces was revolutionized. Not only were they disappointed in Napoleon, but the Red Party offered them, instead of the name, the content, instead of illusory freedom from taxation, repayment of the milliard paid to the legitimists, the adjustment of mortgages, and the abolition of usury. The army itself was infected with the revolutionary fever. In voting for Bonaparte, it voted for victory and gave it defeat. In him, it voted for the little corporal behind whom the great revolutionary general is concealed. And he once more gave it the great generals behind whom the clay corporal shelters himself. There was no doubt that the Red Party, that is, the coalesced democratic party, was bound to celebrate, if not victory, still great triumphs. That Paris, the army, and a great part of the provinces would vote for it. Ledru Rollin, the leader of the Montagne, was elected by 5 departments. No leader of the Party of Order carried off such a victory. No candidate belonging to the proletarian party proper. This election reveals to us the secret of the democratic socialist party. If on the one hand the Montaigne, the parliamentary champion of the democratic petty bourgeoisie, was forced to unite with the socialist doctrinaires of the proletariat, forced by the terrible material defeat of June to raise itself up again through intellectual victories, and not yet enabled through the development of the remaining classes to seize the revolutionary dictatorship, had to throw itself into the arms of the doctrinaires of its emancipation, the founders of socialist sects, the revolutionary peasants, the army, and the provinces, on the other hand, ranged themselves behind the Montaigne, which thus became lord and master in the revolutionary army camp and through the understanding with the socialists. They eliminated every antagonism in the revolutionary party. In the latter half of the life of the Constituent Assembly, it represented Assembly's Republican fervor and caused to be buried in oblivion its sins during the provisional government, during the executive commission, during the June days. In the same measure as the Party of the National, in accordance with its half and half nature, had allowed itself to be put down by the royalist ministry, the Party of the Mountain, which had been brushed aside during the omnipotence of the National, rose and asserted itself as the parliamentary representative of the revolution. In fact, the Party of the National had nothing to oppose to the other royalist factions but ambitious personalities and idealistic humbug. The Party of the Mountain, on the contrary, represented a mass hovering between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, a mass whose material democratic interests demanded institutions. In comparison with the Cavaignacs and the Marists, Ledru Rollin and the Montaigne therefore represented the true revolution. And from the consciousness of this important situation, they drew the greater courage the more the expression of revolutionary energy limited itself to parliamentary attacks, bringing in bills of impeachment, threats, raised voices, thundering speeches, and extremes which were pushed only as far as phrases. The peasants were in about the same position as the petty bourgeoisie. They had more or less the same social demands to put forward. All the middle strata of society, so far as they were revolutionary driven into the movement, were therefore bound to find their hero in Ledru Rollin. Ledru Rollin was the personage of the democratic petty bourgeoisie, as against the Party of Order, the half conservative, half revolutionary, and wholly utopian reformers of this order had first to be pushed to the forefront. The Party of the National, the friends of the Constitution quond. Meme, the Republicans, per its symbols, were completely defeated in the elections. A tiny minority of them was sent into the legislative chamber. Their most noted leaders vanished from the stage, even Marist, the editor-in-chief and the Orpheus of the respectable republic. On May 28, the Legislative Assembly convened. On June 11, the collision of May 8 was renewed and, in the name of the Montani, Led Rowland brought in a bill of impeachment against the president and the ministry for violation of the Constitution, for the bombardment of Rome. On June 12, the Legislative Assembly rejected the bill of impeachment, just as the Constituent Assembly had rejected it on May 11th. But the proletariat this time drove the Montaigne onto the streets. Not to a street battle, however, but only to a street procession. It is enough to say that the Montaigne was at the head of this movement to know that the movement was defeated, and that June 1849 was a caricature, as ridiculous as it was vile, of June 1848. The great retreat of June 13th was eclipsed only by the still greater battle report of Changarnier, the great man that the party of order improvised. Every social epoch needs its great men, and when it does not find them, it invents them, as Helvetius says. On December 20, only one half of the constituted bourgeois republic was in existence, the president. On May 28, it was completed by the other half, the Legislative Assembly. In June 1848, the constituent bourgeois republic, by an unspeakable battle against the proletariat, and in June 1849, the constituted bourgeois republic, by an unutterable comedy with the petty bourgeoisie, engraved their names in the birth register of history. June 1849 was the nemesis of June 1848. In June 1849, it was not the workers that were vanquished. It was the petty bourgeois who stood between them and the revolution that were felled. June 1849 was not a bloody tragedy between wage labor and capital, but a prison-filling and lamentable play of debtors and creditors. The party of order had won. It was all powerful. It had now to show what it was. Part 2. Consequences of June 13, 1849 and December 20. The Janus head of the constitutional republic had still shown only one face, the executive face with the indistinct plain features of L. Bonaparte. On May 28, 1849, it showed its second face, the legislative, pitted with the scars of the orgies of the Restoration and the July monarchy had left behind. With the Legislative National Assembly, the phenomenon of the constitutional republic was completed, that is, the republican form of government in which the rule of the bourgeois class is constituted. The common rule, therefore, of the two great royalist factions that formed the French bourgeoisie, the coalesced legitimists and Orleanists, the party of order. While the French republic thus became the property of the coalition of the royalist parties, the European coalition of the counter-revolutionary powers embarked simultaneously upon a general crusade against the last places of refuge of the March revolutions. Russia invaded Hungary, Prussia marched against the army defending the right constitution, and Oudinot bombarded Rome. The European crisis was evidently approaching a decisive turning point. The eyes of all Europe were turned on Paris, and the eyes of all Paris on the Legislative Assembly. On June 11th, Ledru Rollin mounted its tribune. He made no speech. He formulated an indictment of the ministers, naked, unadorned, factual, concentrated, forceful. The attack on Rome is an attack on the Constitution. The attack on the Roman Republic is an attack on the French Republic. Article 5 of the Constitution reads, the French Republic never employs its forces against the liberty of any people whatsoever, and the President employs the French army against Roman liberty. Article 54 of the Constitution forbids the executive power to declare any war whatsoever without the consent of the National Assembly. The Constituent Assembly's resolution of May 8 expressly commands the ministers to make the Rome expedition conform with the utmost speed to its original mission. It therefore just as expressly prohibits war on Rome, and Oudinot bombards Rome. Thus, Ledru Rollin called the Constitution itself as a witness for the prosecution against Bonaparte and his ministers. At the royalist majority of the National Assembly, he, the tribune of the Constitution, hurled the threatening declaration. The Republicans will know how to command respect for the Constitution by every means, be it even by force of arms. By force of arms, came the hundredfold echo of the Montaigne. The majority answered with a terrible tumult. The President of the National Assembly called Ledru Rollin to order. Ledru Rollin repeated the challenge, and finally laid on the President's table a motion for the impeachment of Bonaparte and his ministers. By 361 votes to 203, the National Assembly to pass on from the bombardment of Rome to the next item on the agenda. Resolved, did Ledru Rollin believe he could beat the National Assembly by means of the Constitution, and the President by means of the National Assembly? To be sure, the Constitution forbade any attack on the liberty of foreign peoples, but what the French army attacked in Rome was, according to the ministry, not liberty but the despotism of anarchy. Had the Montaigne still not comprehended, all experiences in the Constituent Assembly notwithstanding, that the interpretation of the Constitution did not belong to those who had made it, but only to those who accepted it, that its wording must be construed in its Bible meaning, and that the bourgeois meaning was its only Bible meaning, that Bonaparte and the royalist majority of the National Assembly were the authentic interpreters of the Constitution, as the priest is the authentic interpreter of the Bible, and the judge the authentic interpreter of the laws should the National Assembly, freshly emerged from the general elections, feel itself bound by the testamentary provisions of the dead Constituent Assembly, whose will and Odilon Barrett had broken while it was alive. When Ledru Rollin cited the Constituent Assembly's resolution of May 8, had he forgotten that the same Constituent Assembly on May 11 had rejected his first motion for the impeachment of Bonaparte and the ministers, that it had acquitted the President and the ministers, that it had thus sanctioned the attack on Rome as constitutional, that he only lodged an appeal against a judgment already delivered, that he, lastly, appealed from the Republican Constituent Assembly to the Royalist Legislative Assembly. The Constitution itself calls insurrection to its aid by summoning, in a special article, every citizen to protect it. Ledru Rollin based himself on this article, but at the same time, are not the public authorities organized for the defense of the Constitution? And does not the violation of the Constitution begin only from the moment when one of the constitutional public authorities rebels against the other, and the President of the Republic, the ministers of the Republic, and the National Assembly of the Republic were in the most harmonious agreement? What the Montaigne attempted on June 11th was an insurrection within the limits of pure reason, that is, a purely parliamentary insurrection. The majority of the Assembly, intimidated by the prospect of an armed rising of the popular masses, was, in Bonaparte and the ministers, to destroy its own power and the significance of its own election. Had not the Constituent Assembly similarly attempted to annul the election of Bonaparte, when it insisted so obstinately on the dismissal of the Barrett ministry? Neither were there lacking from the time of the convention models for parliamentary insurrections, which had suddenly transformed completely the relation between the majority and the minority, and should the young Montaigne not succeed where the old had nor did relations that succeeded. The moment seemed unfavorable for such an undertaking. Popular unrest in Paris had reached an alarmingly high point. The army, according to its vote at the election, did not seem favorably inclined toward the government. The legislative majority itself was still too young to have become consolidated, and in addition, it consisted of old gentlemen. If the Montaigne were successful in a parliamentary insurrection, the helm of state would fall directly into its hands. The democratic petty bourgeoisie, for its part, wished, as always, for nothing more fervently than to see the battle fought out in the clouds over its head between the departed spirits of Parliament. Finally, both of them, the democratic petty bourgeoisie and its representatives, the Montaigne, would, through a parliamentary insurrection, achieve their great purpose. That of breaking the power of the bourgeoisie without unleashing the proletariat, or letting it appear otherwise than in perspective. The proletariat would have been used without becoming dangerous. After the vote of the National Assembly on June 11th, a conference took place between some members of the Montaigne and delegates of the secret workers' societies. The latter urged that the attack be started the same evening. The Montaigne decisively rejected this plan. On no account did it want to let the leadership slip out of its hands. Its allies were as suspect to it as its antagonists, and rightly so. The memory of June 1848 surged through the ranks of the Paris proletariat more vigorously than ever. Nevertheless, it was chained to the alliance with the Montaigne. The latter represented the largest part of the departments. It had increased its influence in the army. It had at its disposal the democratic section of the National Guard. It had the moral power of the shopkeepers behind it. To begin the revolution at this moment against the will of the Montaigne would have meant for the proletariat, decimated moreover by cholera and driven out of Paris in considerable numbers by unemployment. To repeat uselessly the June days of 1848, without the situation which had forced this desperate struggle. The proletarian delegates did the only rational thing. They obligated the Montaigne to compromise itself that is to come out beyond the confines of the parliamentary struggle, in the event that its bill of impeachment was rejected. During the whole of June 13th, the proletariat maintained the same skeptically watchful attitude, and awaited a seriously engaged, irrevocable melee between the Democratic National Guard and the army, in order then to plunge into the fight and push the revolution forward beyond the petty bourgeois aim set for it. In the event of victory, a proletarian commune was already formed, which would take its place beside the official government. The Parisian workers had learned in the bloody school of June 1848. On June 12th, Minister Lacrosse himself brought forward in the Legislative Assembly the motion to proceed at once to the discussion of the bill of impeachment. During the night, the government had made every provision for defense and attack. The majority of the National Assembly was determined to drive the rebellious minority out into the streets. The minority itself could no longer retreat. The die was cast. The bill of impeachment was rejected by 377 votes to 8. The Mountain, which had abstained from voting, rushed resentfully into the propaganda halls of the Pacific Democracy, the newspaper offices of the Democratie Pacifique. Its withdrawal from the Parliament building broke its strength, as withdrawal from the earth broke the strength of Antæus, her giant son. Samsons in the precincts of the Legislative Assembly, the Montagnards were only Philistines in the precincts of the Pacific Democracy. A long, noisy, rambling debate ensued. The Montaigne was determined to compel respect for the Constitution by every means, only not by force of arms. In this decision, it was supported by manifesto and by a deputation of Friends of the Constitution. Friends of the Constitution was what the wreckage of the coterie of the National, the bourgeois Republican Party called itself. While 6 of its remaining parliamentary representatives had voted against, the others in a body voting for the rejection of the bill of impeachment. While Cavaignac placed his saber at the disposal of the party of order, the larger extra parliamentary part of the coterie greedily seized the opportunity to emerge from its position of a political pariah and to press into the ranks of the Democratic Party. Did they not appear as the natural shield bearers of this party which hid itself behind their shield, behind the principles, behind the Constitution? Till break of day the mountain was in labor. It gave birth to a proclamation to the people, which on the morning of June occupied a more or less shamefaced place in two socialist journals. It declared the president, the ministers, and the majority of the Legislative Assembly outside the Constitution, and summoned the National Guard, the army, and finally also the people to arise. Long live the Constitution was the slogan it put forward, a slogan that signified nothing other than down with the revolution. In conformity with the constitutional proclamation of the mountain, there was a so-called peaceful demonstration of the petty bourgeois on June 13th, that is, a street procession from the Château d'Eau through the boulevards, 30,000 strong, mainly National Guardsmen, unarmed, with an admixture of members of the secret worker sections, moving along with the cry, "Long live the Constitution," which was uttered mechanically, icily, and with a bad conscience by the members of the procession itself, and thrown back ironically by the echo of the people that surged along the sidewalks. Instead of swelling up like thunder, from the many voiced song the chest notes were missing, and when the procession swung by the meeting hall of the Friends of the Constitution, and a hired herald of the Constitution appeared on the housetop, violently cleaving the air. with his clapper hat and from tremendous lungs letting the catch cry long live the Constitution, fall like hail on the heads of the pilgrims. They themselves seemed overcome for a moment by the comedy of the situation. It is known how the procession, having arrived at the termination of the Rue de la Paix, was received in the boulevards by the dragoons and chasseurs of Changarnier in an altogether unparliamentary way. How in a trice it scattered in all directions, and how it threw behind it a few shouts of to arms, only in order that the parliamentary call to arms of June 11th might be fulfilled. The majority of the Montagne assembled in the Rue du Hasard scattered when this violent dispersion of the peaceful procession, the muffled rumors of murder of unarmed citizens on the boulevards, and the growing tumult in the streets seemed to herald the approach of a rising. Later Rollin at the head of a small band of deputies saved the honor of the mountain, under the protection of the Paris artillery which had assembled in the Palais National. They betook themselves to the Conservatoire des Arts et Métiers, where the 5th and 6th legions of the National Guard were to arrive. But the Montagnards waited in vain for the 5th and 6th legions. These discreet National Guards left their representatives in the lurch. The Paris artillery itself prevented the people from throwing up barricades. Chaotic disorder made any decision impossible. The troops of the line advanced with fixed bayonets. Some of the representatives were taken prisoner, while others escaped. Thus ended June 13th. If June 23, 1848 was the insurrection of the revolutionary proletariat, June 13, 1849 was the insurrection of the democratic petty bourgeois, each of these two insurrections being a classically pure expression of the class which had been its vehicle. Only in lions did it come to an obstinate bloody conflict. Here, where the industrial bourgeoisie and the industrial proletariat stand directly opposed to one another, where the workers' movement is not, as in Paris, included in and determined by the general movement, June 13th, in its repercussion, lost its original character. Wherever else it broke out in the provinces, it did not kindle fire a cold lightning flash. June 13 closes the first period in the life of the constitutional republic, which had attained its normal existence on May 28, 1849. With the meeting of the Legislative Assembly. The whole period of its prologue is filled with vociferous struggle between the party of order and the Montagne, between the big bourgeoisie and the petty bourgeoisie, which strove in vain against the consolidation of the bourgeois republic, for which it had itself continuously conspired in the provisional government and in the executive commission, and for which, during the June days, it had fought fanatically against the proletariat. The 13th of June breaks its resistance and makes the legislative dictatorship of the United Royalists a fait accompli. From this moment, the National Assembly is only a committee of public safety of the party of order. Paris had put the president, the ministers, and the majority of the National Assembly in a state of impeachment. They put Paris in a state of siege. The mountain had declared the majority of the Legislative Assembly outside the Constitution. For violation of the Constitution, the majority handed over the mountain to the haute court and prescribed everything in it that still had vital force. It was decimated to a rump without head or heart. The minority had gone so far as to attempt a parliamentary insurrection. The majority elevated its parliamentary despotism to law. It decreed new standing orders, which annihilate the freedom of the tribune and authorized the president of the National Assembly to punish representatives for violation of the standing orders with censure, with fines, with stoppage of their salaries, with suspension of membership, with incarceration. Over the rump of the Montagne it hung the rod instead of the sword. The remainder of the deputies of the Montagne owed it to their honor to make a mass exit. By such an act, the dissolution of the party of order would have been hastened. It would have had to break up into its original component parts the moment not even the semblance of an opposition would hold it together any longer. Simultaneously, with their parliamentary power, the democratic petty bourgeois were robbed of their armed power through the dissolution of the Paris artillery and the 8th, 9th, and 12th legions of the National Guard. On the other hand, the Legion of High Finance, which on June 13th had raided the print shops of Boule and Rue, demolished the presses, played havoc with the offices of the Republican journals, and arbitrarily arrested editors, compositors, printers, shipping clerks, and errand boys, received encouraging approval from the tribune of the National Assembly. All over France, the disbanding of National Guards suspected of republicanism was repeated. A new press law, a new law of association, a new law in the state of siege, the prisons of Paris overflowing, the political refugees driven out, all the journals that go beyond the limits of the national suspended, lions and the 5 departments surrounding it abandoned to the brutal persecution of military despotism. The courts ubiquitous, and the army of officials so often purged once more. These were the inevitable, the constantly recurring commonplaces of victorious reaction, worth mentioning after the massacres, and the deportations of June only because this time they were directed not only against Paris but also against the departments, not only against the proletariat but above all against the middle classes. The repressive laws by which the declaration of a state of siege was left to the discretion of the government, the press still more firmly muzzled, and the right of association annihilated, absorbed the whole of the legislative activity of the National Assembly during the months of June, July, and August. However, this epoch is characterized not by the exploitation of victory in fact, but in principle, not by the resolutions of the National Assembly, but by the grounds advanced for these resolutions, not by the thing but by the phrase, not by the phrase but by the accent and the gesture which enliven the phrase, the brazen unreserved expression of royalist sentiments, the contemptuously aristocratic insults to the republic, the coquettishly frivolous babbling of restoration aims in a word, the boastful violation of republican decorum, give its peculiar tone and color to this period. Long live the Constitution was the battle cry of the vanquished of June 13th. The victors were therefore absolved from the hypocrisy of constitutional, that is, republican speech. The counter-revolution subjugated Hungary, Italy, and Germany, and they believed that the restoration was already at the gates of France. Among the masters of ceremonies of the factions of order, there ensued a real competition to document their royalism in the Moniteur, and to confess, repent, and crave pardon before God and man for liberal sins perchance committed by them under the monarchy. No day passed without the February Revolution being declared a national calamity from the tribune of the National Assembly. Without some legitimate provincial cabbage, Juncker solemnly stating that he had never recognized the republic, without one of the cowardly deserters of and traitors to the July monarchy relating the belated deeds of heroism in the performance of which only the philanthropy of Louis Philippe or other misunderstandings had hindered him. What was admirable in the February days was not the magnanimity of the victorious people, but the self-sacrifice and moderation of the royalists, who had allowed it to be victorious. One representative of the people proposed to divert part of the money destined for the relief of those wounded in February to the municipal guards, who alone in those days had deserved well of the fatherland. Another wanted to have an equestrian statue decreed to the Duke of Orleans in the place du Carrousel. Thiers called the Constitution a dirty piece of paper. There appeared in succession on the tribunalists to repent of their conspiracy against the legitimate monarchy by legitimists, who reproached themselves with having hastened the overthrow of monarchy in general by resisting the illegitimate monarchy. Thiers, who repented of having intrigued against Mole, who repented of having intrigued against Guizot, Barrett, who repented of having intrigued against all three. The cry long live the social democratic republic was declared unconstitutional. The cry long live the republic was prosecuted as social democratic. On the anniversary of the Battle of Waterloo, a representative declared, I fear an invasion of the Prussians less than the entry of the revolutionary refugees into France. To the complaints about the terrorism organized in lions and the neighboring departments, Barraguay de Liers answered, I prefer the white terror to the red terror. And the assembly applauded frantically every time an epigram against the republic, against the revolution, against the constitution, for the monarchy, or for the Holy Alliance fell from the lips of its orders. Every infringement of the minus republican formality, for example, that of addressing the representatives as citoyens, filled the Knights of Order with enthusiasm. The by-elections in Paris on July 8th, held under the influence of the state of siege and of the abstention of a great part of the proletariat from the ballot box, the taking of Rome by the French army, the entry into Rome of the Red Eminences, and, in their train of inquisition and monkish terrorism, added fresh victories to the victory of June and increased the intoxication of the party of order. Finally, in the middle of August, half with the intention of attending the department councils just assembled, half through exhaustion from the tendentious orgy of many months, the royalists decreed a 2-month recess of the National Assembly. With transparent irony, they left behind a commission of 25 representatives, the cream of the legitimists and the Orleanists, a Mole and a Changarnier as proxies for the National Assembly and as guardians of the Republic. The irony was more profound than they suspected. They, condemned by history to help overthrow the monarchy they loved, were destined by it to conserve the republic they hated. The second period in the life of the constitutional republic, its royalist period of sowing wild oats, closes with the recess of the Legislative Assembly. The state of siege in Paris had again been raised, the activities of the press had again begun. During the suspension of the social democratic papers, during the period of repressive legislation and royalist bluster, the sequel, the old literary representative of the monarchist, constitutional petty bourgeois, republicanized itself. The presse, the old literary exponent of the bourgeois reformers, democratized itself, while the national, the old classic organ of the republican bourgeois, socialized itself. The secret societies grew in extent and intensity in the same degree that the public clubs became impossible. The workers, industrial cooperatives tolerated as purely commercial societies, while of no account economically, became politically so many means of cementing the proletariat. June 13 had struck off the official heads of the various semi-revolutionary parties, the masses that remained one head of their own. The Knights of Order had practiced intimidation by prophecies of the terror of the Red Republic, the base excesses, the hyperborean atrocities of the victorious counter-revolution in Hungary, in Baden, and in Rome washed the Red Republic white. And the malcontent intermediate classes of French society began to prefer the promises of the Red Republic, with its problematic terrors to the terrors of the Red Monarchy with its actual hopelessness. No socialist in France spread more revolutionary propaganda than Hainaut. A chaque capacite silence ouvres. In the meantime, Louis Bonaparte exploited the recess of the National Assembly to make princely tours of the provinces. The most hot-blooded legitimists made pilgrimages to EMS, to the grandchild of the Saint Louis, and the mass of the popular representatives on the side of order intrigued in the department councils which had just met. It was necessary to make them pronounce what the majority of the National Assembly did not yet dare pronounce, an urgent motion for immediate revision of the Constitution. According to the Constitution, it could not be revised before 1852, and then only by a National Assembly called together expressly for this purpose. If, however, the majority of the department councils expressed themselves to this effect, was not the National Assembly bound to sacrifice the virginity of the Constitution to the voice of France? The National Assembly entertained the same hopes in regard to these provincial assemblies as the nuns in Voltaire's Henriette entertained in regard to the panders, but some exceptions apart, the Potiphars of the National Assembly had to deal with just so many Josephs of the provinces. The vast majority did not want to understand the importunate insinuation. The revision of the Constitution was frustrated by the very instruments which were to have called it into being, by the votes of the department councils. The voice of France, and indeed of bourgeois France, had spoken against revision. At the beginning of October, the Legislative National Assembly met once more tantum mutatis ab illo. Its physiognomy was completely changed. The unexpected rejection of revision on the part of the department councils had put it back within the limits of the Constitution and indicated the limits of its term of life. The Orleanists had become mistrustful because of the pilgrimages of the Legitimist to EMS. The Legitimists had grown suspicious because of the Orleanist negotiations with London. The journals of the two factions had fanned the fire and weighed the reciprocal claims of their pretenders. Orleanists and Legitimists grumbled in unison at the machinations of the Bonapartists, which showed themselves in the princely tours, in the more or less transparent emancipatory attempts of the president. In the presumptuous language of the Bonapartist newspapers, Louis Bonaparte grumbled at a National Assembly which found only the Legitimist Orleanist conspiracy legitimate, and a ministry which betrayed him continually to this National Assembly. Finally, the ministry was itself divided on the Roman policy and on the income tax proposed by Minister Passy, decried as socialistic by the conservatives. One of the first bills of the Barrett ministry in the reassembled Legislative Assembly was a demand for a credit of 300,000 francs for the payment of a widow's pension to the Duchess of Orleans. The National Assembly granted it and added to the list of debts of the French nation a sum of 7 million francs. Thus, while Louis Philippe continued to play successfully the role of the pauvre honteux, the shamefaced beggar, the ministry dared not move an increase of salary for Bonaparte, nor did the Assembly appear inclined to grant it. And Louis Bonaparte, as ever, vacillated in the dilemma. Ought Caesar, old Clichy. The minister's second demand for credit, one of 9 million francs between for the costs of the Rome expedition, increased the tension Bonaparte on the one hand and the ministers and the National Assembly on the other. Louis Bonaparte had inserted a letter to his military aide Edgar Ney in the Moniteur in which he bound the papal government to constitutional guarantees. The Pope, on his part, had published an address, motu proprio, in which he rejected any limitation of his restored rule. Bonaparte's letter, with studied indiscretion, raised the curtain on his cabinet in order to expose himself to the eyes of the gallery as a benevolent genius who was, however, misunderstood and shackled in his own house. It was not the first time that he had coquetted with the furtive flights of a free soul. Thiers, the reporter of the commission, completely ignored Bonaparte's flight and contented himself with translating the papal allocution into French. It was not the ministry but Victor Hugo who sought to save the president through an order of the day in which the National Assembly was to express its agreement with Napoleon's letter. Allons donc. With this disrespectful, frivolous interjection, the majority buried Hugo's motion. The policy of the president, the letter of the president himself, allons donc. Who the devil takes Monsieur Bonaparte seriously? Do you believe, Monsieur Victor Hugo, that we believe you, that you believe in the president? Allons donc. Finally, the breach between Bonaparte and the key National Assembly was hastened by the discussion. The Bourbons. In default of the ministry, the president's cousin, son of the ex-king of Westphalia, had put forward this motion, which had no other purpose than to push the Legitimists and the Orleanist pretenders down to the same level, or rather lower level than the Bonapartist pretender, who at least stood in fact at the pinnacle of the state. Napoleon. Bonaparte was disrespectful enough to make the recall of the expelled royal families and the amnesty of the June insurgents parts of one and the same motion. The indignation of the majority compelled him to apologize immediately for the sacrilegious concatenation of the holy and the impious, of the royal races and the proletarian brood, of the fixed stars of society and of its swamplights, and to assign each of the two motions to its proper place. The majority energetically rejected the recall of the royal family, and Barrier, the Demosthenes of the Legitimists, left no doubt about the meaning of the vote. The civic degradation of the pretenders, that is what is intended. It is desire to rob them of their halo, of the last majesty that is left to them, the majesty of exile. What, cried Barrier, would the pretenders think of the president who, forgetting his august origin, came here to live as a simple private individual? It could not have been more clearly intimated to Louis Bonaparte that he had not gained the day by his presence. That whereas the royalists in coalition needed him here in France as a neutral man in the presidential chair, the serious pretenders to the throne had to be kept out of profane sight by the fog of exile. On November 1st, Louis Bonaparte answered the Legislative Assembly with a message which in quite brusque words announced the dismissal of the Barrett ministry and the formation of a new ministry. The Barrett ministry was the ministry of the royalist coalition. The Hopeful ministry was the ministry of Bonaparte, the organ of the president as against the Legislative Assembly, the ministry of the clerks. Bonaparte was no longer the merely neutral man of December 10, 1848. His possession of the executive power had grouped a number of interests around him. The struggle with anarchy forced the party of order itself to increase its influence, and if he was no longer popular, the party of order was unpopular. Could he not hope to compel the Orleanists and the Legitimists, through their rivalry as well as through the necessity of some sort of monarchist restoration, to recognize the neutral pretender? From November 1st, 1849, dates the third period in the life of the constitutional republic, a period which closes with March 10, 1850. The regular game so much admired by Guizot of the constitutional institutions, the wrangling between executive and legislative power, now begins. More as against the hankering for restoration on the part of the united Orleanists and Legitimists, Bonaparte defends his title to his actual power. The republic, as against the hankering for restoration on the part of Bonaparte, the party of order defends its title to its common rule. The republic, as against the Orleanists, the Legitimists, and as against the Legitimists, the Orleanists, defend the status quo of the republic. All these factions of the party of order, each of which has its own king and its own restoration and pedo, mutually enforce, as against their rivals hankering for usurpation and revolt, the common rule of the bourgeoisie, the form in which the special claims remain neutralized and reserved for the republic. Justice cannot make the republic, so these royalists make the monarchy the only rational form of state, a postulate of practical reason whose realization is never attained, but whose attainment must always be striven for and mentally adhered to as the goal. Thus the constitutional republic had gone forth from the hands of the bourgeois republicans as a hollow ideological formula to become a form full of content and life in the hands of the royalists in coalition. And Thiers spoke more truly than he suspects when he said, "We, the royalists, are the true pillars of the constitutional republic." The overthrow of the ministry of the coalition and the appearance of the ministry of the clerks has a second significance. Its finance minister was Fold. Fold as finance minister signifies the official surrender of France's national wealth to the bourse, the management of the state's property by the bourse, and, in the interest of the bourse, with the nomination of Fold, the finance aristocracy announced its restoration in the Moniteur. This restoration necessarily supplemented the other restorations, which formed just so many links in the chain of the constitutional republic. Louis Philippe had never dared to make a genuine loup servier finance minister. Just as his monarchy was the ideal name for the rule of the big bourgeoisie, so in his ministries the privileged interest had to bear ideologically disinterested names. The bourgeois republic everywhere pushed into the forefront what the different monarchies, legitimist as well as Orleanist, had kept concealed in the background. It made earthly what they had made heavenly. In place of the names of the saints, it put the bourgeois proper names of the dominant class interests. Our whole exposition has shown how the republic from the first day of its existence did not overthrow but consolidated the finance aristocracy. But the concessions made to it were fates to which submission was made without the desire to bring it about. With Fold, the initiative in the government returned to the finance aristocracy. The question will be asked how the coalesced bourgeoisie could bear and suffer the rule of finance, which, under Louis Philippe, depended on the exclusion or subordination of the remaining bourgeois factions. The answer is simple. First of all, the finance aristocracy itself forms a weighty authoritative part of the royalist coalition, whose common governmental power is denominated republic. Are not the spokesmen and leading lights among the Orleanists the old confederates and accomplices of the finance aristocracy? Is it not itself the golden phalanx of Orleanism? As far as the Legitimists are concerned, under Louis Philippe, they had already participated in practice in all the orgies of the bourse, mine, and railway speculations. In general, the combination of large landed property with high finance is a normal fact. Proof. England. Proof. Even Austria. In a country like France, where the volume of national production stands at a disproportionately lower level than the amount of the national debt, where government bonds form the most important subject of speculation, and the bourse the chief market for the investment of capital that wants to turn itself to account in an unproductive way, in such a country a countless number of people from all bourgeois or semi-bourgeois classes must have an interest in the state debt, in the bourse gamblings, in finance. Do not all these interested subalterns find their natural the faction which represents this interest in its vastest outlines, which represents it as a whole? What conditions the accrual of state property to high finance, the constantly growing indebtedness of the state, and the indebtedness of the state, the constant excess of its expenditure over its income, a disproportion which is simultaneously the cause and effect of the system of state loans. In order to escape from this indebtedness, the state must either restrict its expenditure, that is, simplify and curtail the government organism, govern as little as possible, employ as few personnel as possible, enter as little as possible into relations with bourgeois society. This path was impossible for the party of order, whose means of repression, official interference in the name of the state, and ubiquity through organs of state were bound to increase in the same measure as the number of quarters increased from which its rule and the conditions for the existence of its class were threatened. The gendarmerie cannot be reduced in the same measure as a tax on persons and property increase. Or the state must seek to evade the debts and produce an immediate but transitory balance in its budget by putting extraordinary taxes on the shoulders of the wealthiest classes. But was the party of order to sacrifice its own wealth on the altar of the fatherland to stop the national wealth from being exploited by the bourse? Posse bet. Therefore, without a complete revolution in the French state, no revolution in the French state budget. Along with the state budget necessarily goes the lordship of the trade and state debts, of the state creditors, the bankers, the money dealers, and the wolves of the bourse. Only one faction of the party of order was directly concerned in the overthrow of the finance aristocracy, the manufacturers. We are not speaking of the middle, of the smaller people engaged in industry. We are speaking of the reigning princes of the manufacturing interests, who had formed the broad basis of the dynastic opposition under Louis Philippe. Their interest is indubitably reduction of the cost of production and hence reduction of the taxes which enter into production, and hence reduction of the state debts, the interest on which enters into the taxes. Hence the overthrow of the finance aristocracy. In England, and the largest French manufacturers are petty bourgeois compared with their English rivals actually find the manufacturers, a Cobden, a Bright, at the head of the crusade against the bank and the stock exchange aristocracy. Why not in France? In England, industry predominates. In France, agriculture. In England, industry requires free trade. In France, protective tariffs, national monopoly alongside the other monopolies. French industry does not dominate French production. The French industrialists, therefore, do not dominate the French bourgeoisie. In order to secure the advancement of their interests as against the remaining factions of the bourgeoisie, they cannot, like the English, take the lead of the movement and simultaneously push their class interests to the fore. They must follow in the train of the revolution and serve interests which are opposed to the collective interests of their class. In February, they had misunderstood their position. February sharpened their wits. And who was more directly threatened by the workers than the employer, the industrial capitalists? The manufacturer, therefore, of necessity became in France the most fanatical member of the party of order. The reduction of its profit by finance, what is that compared with the abolition of profit by the proletariat? In France, the petty bourgeois does what normally the industrial bourgeois would have to do. The worker does what normally would be the task of the petty bourgeois. And the task of the worker, who accomplishes that? No one. In France it is not accomplished. In France it is proclaimed. It is not accomplished anywhere within the national boundaries. The class war within French society turns into a world war, in which the nations confront one another. Accomplishment begins only at the moment when, through the world war, the proletariat is pushed to the fore of the people that dominates the world market, to the forefront in England. The revolution, which finds here not its end, but its organizational beginning, is no short-lived revolution. The present generation is like the Jews whom Moses led through the wilderness. It not only has a new world to conquer, it must go under in order to make room for the men who are able to cope with the new world. Let us return to Fold. On November 14, 1849, Fold mounted the tribune of the National Assembly and expounded his system of finance. An apology for the old system of taxes, retention of the wine tax, abandonment of Passy income tax. Passy too was no revolutionist. He was an old minister of Louis Philippe's. He belonged to the Puritans of the Dufour brand and to the most intimate confidants of Pest, the scapegoat of the July monarchy. Passy too had praised the old tax system and recommended the retention of the wine tax, but he had at the same time torn the veil from the state deficit. He had declared the necessity for a new tax, the income tax, if the bankruptcy of the state was to be avoided. Fold, who had recommended state bankruptcy to Lady Rollin, recommended the state deficit to the Legislative Assembly. He promised economies, the secret of which later revealed itself in that, for example, expenditures diminished by 60 millions, while the floating debt increased by 200 millions. Conjurer's tricks in the grouping of figures in the drawing up of accounts, which all finally amounted to new loans. Alongside the other jealous bourgeois factions, the finance aristocracy naturally did not act in so shamelessly corrupt a manner under Fold as under Louis Philippe. But once it existed, the system remained the same: constant increase in the debts, masking of the deficit. And in time, the old bourse swindling came out more openly. Proof: the law concerning the Avignon Railway, the mysterious fluctuations in government securities. For a brief time, the topic of the day throughout Paris. Finally, the ill-starred speculations of Fold and Bonaparte on the elections of March 10th. With the official restoration of the finance aristocracy, the French people soon had to stand again before February 24. The Constituent Assembly, in an attack of misanthropy against its heir, had abolished the wine tax for the year of our Lord 1850. New debts could not be paid with the abolition of old taxes. Creton, a cretin of the party of order, had moved the retention of the wine tax even before the Legislative Assembly recessed. Fold took up this motion in the name of the Bonapartist ministry, and on December 28, 1849, the anniversary of the day Bonaparte was proclaimed president, the National Assembly decreed the restoration of the wine tax. The sponsor of this restoration was not a financier. It was the Jesuit chief Montalembert. His argument was strikingly simple: taxation is the maternal breast on which the government is suckled. The government is the instruments of repression. It is the organs of authority. It is the army. It is the police. It is the officials, the judges, the ministers. It is the priests. An attack on taxation is an attack by the anarchists on the sentinels of order, who safeguard the material and spiritual production of bourgeois society from the inroads of the proletarian vandals. Taxation is the fifth god, side by side with property, the family, order, and religion. And the wine tax is incontestably taxation, and moreover, not ordinary but traditional, monarchically disposed, respectable taxation. Vive l'impôt de boisson. 3 cheers and 1 cheer more. When the French peasant paints the devil, he paints him in the guise of a tax collector. From the moment when Montalembert elevated taxation to a god, the peasant became godless, atheist, and threw himself into the arms of the devil, of socialism. The religion of order had forfeited him. The Jesuits had forfeited him. Bonaparte had forfeited him. December 20, 1849 had irrevocably compromised December 20, 1848. The nephew of his uncle was not the first of his family whom the wine tax defeated. This tax, which in Montalembert's phrase heralds the revolutionary storm. The real the great Napoleon declared on St. Helena that the reintroduction of the wine tax had contributed more to his downfall than all else, since it had alienated from him the peasants of southern France. As far back as under Louis XIII, the favorite object of the hatred of the people. See the writings of Boissier and Vauban, abolished by the First Revolution. It was reintroduced by Napoleon in a modified form in 1808. When the Restoration entered France, there trotted before it not only the Cossacks, but also the promises to abolish the wine tax. The gentle Hommery naturally did not need to keep its word to the gens tailables mercy et miséricorde. The year 1830 promised the abolition of the wine tax. It was not its way to do what it said or say what it did. The year 1848 promised the abolition of the wine tax, just as it promised everything. Finally, the Constituent Assembly, which promised nothing, made, as already mentioned, a testamentary provision whereby the wine tax was to disappear on January 1, 1850. And just 10 days before, January 1, 1850, the Legislative Assembly introduced it once more, so that the French people perpetually pursued it, and when they had thrown it out the door saw it coming again through the window. The popular hatred of the wine tax is explained by the fact that it unites in itself all the odiousness of the French system of taxation. The mode of collection is odious, the mode of distribution aristocratic, for the rates of taxation are the same for the commonest as for the costliest wines. It increases therefore in geometrical progression as the wealth of the consumers decreases, an inverted progressive tax. It accordingly directly provokes the poisoning of the laboring classes by putting a premium on adulterated and imitation wines. It lessens consumption. Since it sets up octroi before the gates of all towns of over 4,000 inhabitants and transforms each such town into a foreign country with a protective tariff against French wine. The big wine merchants, but still more the small ones, the marchands de vins whose livelihood directly depends on the consumption of wine, are so many avowed enemies of the wine tax. And finally, by lessening consumption, the wine tax curtails the producer's market, while it renders the urban workers incapable of paying for wine. It renders the wine growers incapable of selling it. And France has a wine growing population of about 12 million. One can therefore understand the hatred of the people in general. One can in particular understand the fanaticism of the peasants against the wine tax. And in addition, they saw in its restoration no isolated, more or less accidental event. The peasants have a kind of historical tradition of their own, which is handed down from father to son. And in this historical school, it is muttered that whenever any government wants to dupe the peasants, it promises the abolition of the wine tax. And as soon as it has duped the peasants, it retains or reintroduces the wine tax. In the wine tax, the peasant tests the bouquet of the government, its tendency. The restoration of the wine tax on December 20 meant Louis Bonaparte is like the rest, but he was not like the rest. He was a peasant discovery, and in the petitions carrying millions of signatures against the wine tax, they took back the votes that they had given a year before to the nephew of his uncle. The country folk, over 2/3 of the total French population, consist for the most part of so-called free landowners. The first generation, gratuitously freed by the revolution of 1789 from its feudal burdens, had paid no price for the soil. But the following generations paid, under the form of the price of land, what their semi-serf forefathers had paid in the form of rent, tithes, corvée, etc. The more on the one hand the population grew, and the more on the other hand the partition of the soil increased, the higher became the price of the parcels, for the demand for them increased with their smallness. But in proportion as the price the peasant paid for his parcel rose, whether he bought it directly or whether he had it counted as capital by his company heirs, necessarily the indebtedness of the peasants, that is, the mortgage, also rose. The claim to a debt encumbering the land is termed a mortgage, a pawn ticket in respect of the land. Just as privileges accumulated on the medieval estate, mortgages accumulate on the modern small allotment. On the other hand, under the system of parcelization, the soil is purely an instrument of production for its proprietor. Now the fruitfulness of land diminishes in the same measure as land is divided. The application of machinery to the land, the division of labor, major soil. Improvement measures such as cutting drainage and irrigation canals and the like become more and more impossible, while the unproductive costs of cultivation increase in the same proportion as the division of the instrument of production itself. All this, regardless of whether the possessor of the small allotment possesses capital or not. But the more the division increases, the more does the parcel of land with its utterly wretched inventory form the entire capital of the small allotment peasant. The more does investment of capital in the land diminish. The more does the peasant lack land, money, and education for making use of the progress and agronomy. And the more does the cultivation of the soil retrogress. Finally, the net proceeds diminish in the same proportion as the gross consumption increases, as the whole family of the peasant is kept back from other occupations through its holding and yet is not able to live by it. In the measure therefore that the population and with it the division of the land increases, does the instrument of production, the soil, become more expensive and its fertility decrease, does agriculture decline and the peasant become loaded with debt. And what was the effect becomes in its turn the cause. Each generation leaves behind another more deeply in debt. Each new generation begins under more unfavorable and more aggravating conditions. Mortgaging begets mortgaging, and when it becomes impossible for the peasant to offer his small holding as security for new debts, that is, to encumber it with new mortgages, he falls a direct victim to usury, and usurious interest rates become so much the more exorbitant. Thus it came about that the French peasant cedes to the capitalist, in the form of interest on the mortgages encumbering the soil and in the form of interest on the advances made by the usurer without mortgages. Not only ground rent, not only the industrial profit, in a word, not only the whole net profit, but even a part of the wages, and that therefore he has sunk to the level of the Irish tenant farmer all under the pretense of being a private proprietor. This process was accelerated in France by the ever-growing burden of taxes, by court costs called forth in part directly by the formalities with which French legislation encumbers the ownership of land, in part by the innumerable conflicts over parcels everywhere bounding and crossing each other, and in part by the litigiousness of the peasants, whose enjoyment of property is limited to the fanatical assertion of their title to their fancied property, their property rights. According to a statistical statement of 1840, the gross production of French agriculture amounted to 5,237,178,000 francs. Of this, the cost of cultivation came to 3,552,000,000 francs, including consumption by the persons working. There remained a net product of 1,685,178,000 francs, from which 550,000,000 had to be deducted for interest on mortgages, 100,000. 0,000 for law officials, 350,000,000 for taxes, and 107,000,000 for registration money, stamp duty, mortgage fees, etc. There was left 1/3 of the net product, or 538,000,000, when distributed over the population at not 25 francs per head net product. Naturally, neither usury outside of mortgage nor lawyers' fees, etc. are included in this calculation. The condition of the French peasants when the Republic had added new burdens to their old ones is comprehensible. It can be seen that their exploitation differs only in form from the exploitation of the industrial proletariat. The exploiter is the same, capital. The individual capitalists exploit the individual peasants through mortgages and usury. The capitalist class exploits the peasant class through the state taxes. The peasant's title to property is a talisman by which capital held him hitherto under its spell, the pretext under which it set him against the industrial proletariat. Only the fall of capital can raise the peasant. Only an anti-capitalist, a proletarian government can break his economic misery, his social degradation. The constitutional republic is the dictatorship of his united exploiters. The social democratic, the red republic, is the dictatorship of his allies. and the scale rises or falls according to the votes the peasant casts into the ballot box. He himself has to decide his fate. So spoke the socialists in pamphlets, almanacs, calendars, and leaflets of all kinds. This language became more understandable to him through the counter-writings of the party of order, which for its part turned to him, and which by gross exaggeration, by its brutal conception and representation of the intentions and ideas of the socialists, struck the true peasant note and overstimulated his lust after forbidden fruit. But most understandable was the language of the actual experience that the peasant class had gained from the use of the suffrage, where the disillusionments overwhelming him, blow upon blow, with revolutionary speed. Revolutions are the locomotives of history. The gradual revolutionizing of the peasants was manifested by various symptoms. It early revealed itself in the elections to the Legislative Assembly. It was revealed in the state of siege in the 5 departments bordering Lyons. It was revealed a few months after June 13th in the election of Montagnard in place of the former president of the Chambre. Intruvable by the Department of the Gironde. It was revealed on December 28, 1849, in the election of a red in place of a deceased legitimist deputy in the Department du Gard, that promised land of the legitimists. The scene of the most frightful infamies committed against the Republicans in 1794 and 1795, and the center of the White Terror in 1815, when liberals and Protestants were publicly murdered. This revolutionizing of the most stationary class is most clearly evident since the reintroduction of the wine tax. The governmental measures and the laws of January and February 1850 are directed almost exclusively against the departments and the peasants. The most striking proof of their progress, the Hopeful Circular, by which the gendarme was appointed inquisitor of the prefect, of the sub-prefect, and above all of the mayor, and by which espionage was organized even in the hidden corners of the remotest village community. The law against the school teachers, by which they, the men of talent, the spokesmen, the educators and interpreters of the peasant class, were subjected to the arbitrary power of the prefect. They, the proletarians of the learned class, were chased like hunted beasts from one community to another. The bill against the mayors, by which the Damocles sword of dismissal was hung over their heads, and they, the presidents of the peasant communities, were every moment set in opposition to the president of the republic and the party of order. The ordinance which transformed the 17 military districts of France into 4 pachalics and forced the barracks and the bivouac on the French as their national salon. The education law, by which the party of order proclaimed unconsciousness and the forcible stupefaction of France as the condition of its life under the regime of universal suffrage. What were all these laws and measures? Desperate attempts to reconquer the departments and the peasants of the departments for the party of order. Regarded as repression, they were wretched methods that wrung the neck of their own purpose. The big measures like the retention of the wine tax, of the 45-cent time tax, the scornful rejection of peasant petitions for the repayment of the milliard, etc. All these legislative thunderbolts struck the peasant class all at once, wholesale from the center. The laws and measures cited made attack and resistance general. The topic of the day in every hut. They inoculated every village with revolution. They localized and peasantized the revolution. On the other hand, do not these proposals of Bonaparte and their acceptance by the National Assembly prove the unity of the two powers of the constitutional republic? So far as it is a question of repression of anarchy, that is, of all the classes that rise against the bourgeois dictatorship, did not Saluc, directly after his birth message, assure the Legislative Assembly of his dévouement to order, through the immediately following message of Carlier, that dirty, mean caricature of Fouche, as Louis Bonaparte himself was the shallow caricature of Napoleon? The education law shows us the alliance of the young Catholics with the old Voltairians. Could the rule of the united bourgeois be anything else but the coalesced despotism of the pro-Jesuit restoration and the make, believe free, thinking July monarchy? Had not the weapons that the one bourgeois faction had distributed among the people against the other faction, in their mutual struggle for supremacy, again been torn from it, the people? Since the latter was confronting their united dictatorship, nothing has aroused the fair shopkeeper more than this coquettish attalage of Jesuitism, not even the rejection of the Concordats, amiable. Meanwhile, the collisions between the different factions of the party of order, as well as between the National Assembly and Bonaparte, continued. The National Assembly was far from pleased that Bonaparte, immediately after his coup d'état, after appointing his own Bonapartist ministry, summoned before him the invalids of the monarchy, newly appointed prefects, and made their unconstitutional agitation for his re-election as president the condition of their appointment. That Carlier celebrated his inauguration with the closing of a legitimist club, or that Bonaparte founded a journal of his own, Napoleon, which betrayed the secret longings of the president to the public, while his ministers had to deny them from the tribune of the Legislative Assembly. The latter was far from pleased by the defiant retention of the ministry, notwithstanding its various oaths of no confidence. Far from pleased by the attempts to win the favor of the non-commissioned officers by an extra pay of 4 sous a day, and the favor of the proletariat by plagiarization of Eugene Sue's mysteries by an honor loan bank. Far from pleased finally by the effrontery with which the ministers were made to move the deportation of the remaining June insurgents to popularity on the Legislative Assembly and rose, while the president reserved popularity for himself in detail by individual grants of pardon. Fears let fall threatening words about coup d'état and coup d'état, and the Legislative Assembly revenged itself on Bonaparte by rejecting every proposed law that he put forward for his own benefit, and by inquiring with noisy mistrust, in every instance when he made a proposal in the common interest, whether he did not aspire, through increase of the executive power, to augment the personal power of Bonaparte. In a word, it revenged itself by a conspiracy of contempt. The Legitimist Party on its part saw with vexation the more capable Orleanists once more occupying almost all posts and centralization increasing, while it sought its salvation principally in decentralization. And so it was. The counter-revolution centralized forcibly, that is, it prepared the mechanism of the revolution. It even centralized the gold and silver of France and Paris Bank through the compulsory quotation of banknotes, and so created the ready war chest of the revolution. Lastly, the Orleanists saw with vexation the emergent principle of legitimacy contrasted with their bastard principle, and themselves every moment snubbed and maltreated as the bourgeois misalliance of a noble spouse. Little by little we have seen peasants, petty bourgeois, the middle classes in general, stepping alongside the proletariat, driven into open antagonism to the official republic and treated by it as antagonists. Revolt against bourgeois dictatorship, need of a change of society, adherence to democratic republican institutions as organs of their movement. Grouping around the proletariat as the decisive revolutionary power, these are the common characteristics of the so-called party of social democracy, the party of the Red Republic. This party of anarchy, as its opponents christened it, is no less a coalition of different interests than the party of order, from the smallest reform of the old social disorder to the overthrow of the old social order, from bourgeois liberalism to revolutionary terrorism. As far apart as this lie the extremes that form the starting point and the finishing point of the party of anarchy. Abolition of the protective tariff, socialism, for it strikes at the monopoly of the industrial faction of the party of order. Regulation of the state budget, socialism, for it strikes at the monopoly of the financial faction of the party of order. Free admission of foreign meat and corn, socialism, for it strikes at the monopoly of the third faction of the party of order, large landed property. The demands of the free trade party, that is, of the most advanced English bourgeois party, appear in France as so many socialist demands. Voltairianism, socialism, for it strikes at the fourth faction of the party of order, the Catholic. Freedom of the press, right of association, universal public education, socialism, socialism, they strike at the general monopoly of the party of order. So swiftly had the march of the revolution ripened conditions that the friends of reform of all shades, the most moderate claims of the middle classes, were compelled to group themselves around the banner of the most extreme party of revolution, around the red flag. Yet manifold as the socialism of the different large sections of the party of anarchy was, according to the economic conditions and the total revolutionary requirements of the class or fraction of the class arising out of these. In one point it is in harmony, in proclaiming itself the means of emancipating the proletariat and the emancipation of the latter as its object. Deliberate deception on the part of some, self-deception on the part of the others, who promote the world transformed according to their own needs as the best world for all, as the realization of all revolutionary claims and the elimination of all revolutionary collisions. Socialists behind the general phrases of the party of anarchy, which sound rather like, there is concealed the socialism of the national, of the press, and of the sequel, which more or less consistently wants to overthrow the rule of the finance aristocracy into free industry and trade from their hitherto existing fetters. This is the socialism of industry, of trade, and of agriculture, whose bosses in the party of order deny these interests, insofar as they no longer coincide with their private monopolies. Petty bourgeois socialism, socialism par excellence, is distinct from this bourgeois socialism, to which, as to every variety of socialism, sections of the workers and petty bourgeois naturally rally. Capital hounds this class chiefly as its creditor, so it demands credit institutions. Capital crushes it by competition, so it demands associations supported by the state. Capital overwhelms it by concentration, so it demands progressive taxes, limitations of inheritance, taking over large construction projects by the state, and other measures that forcibly stem the growth of capital. Since it dreams of the peaceful achievement of its socialism, allowing perhaps for a second February revolution lasting a brief day or so becoming historical. Process naturally appears to it as an application of systems which the thinkers of society, whether in companies or as individual inventors, devise or have devised. Thus they become the eclectics or adepts of the existing socialist systems, of doctrinaire socialism, which was the theoretical expression of the proletariat only as long as it had not yet developed further into a free historical movement of its own. While this utopian doctrinaire socialism, which subordinates the total movement to one of its stages, which puts in place of common social production the brainwork of individual pedants and, above all, in fantasy does away with the revolutionary struggle of the classes and its requirements by small conjurers tricks or great sentimentality, while this doctrinaire socialism, which at bottom only idealizes present society, takes a picture of it without shadows, and wants to achieve its ideal athwart the realities of present society, while the proletariat surrenders this socialism to the petty bourgeoisie. While the struggle of the different socialist leaders among themselves sets forth each of the so-called systems as a pretentious adherence to one of the transit points of the social revolution as against another, the proletariat rallies more and more around revolutionary socialism, around communism, for which the bourgeoisie has itself invented the name of blank Y. This socialism is the declaration of the permanence of the revolution. The class dictatorship of the proletariat is the necessary transit point to the abolition of class distinctions generally, to the abolition of all the relations of production on which they rest, to the abolition of all the social relations that correspond to these relations of production, to the revolutionizing of all the ideas that result from these social relations. The scope of this exposition does not permit of developing the subject further. We have seen that just as in the party of order the finance aristocracy necessarily took the lead, so in the party of anarchy the proletariat, while the different classes, united in a revolutionary league, grouped themselves around the proletariat. While the departments became ever more unsafe, and the Legislative Assembly itself ever more morose toward the pretensions of the French Saluc, the long deferred and delayed by election of substitutes for the Montagnards prescribed after June 13th drew near. The government, scorned by its foes, maltreated and daily humiliated by its alleged friends, saw only one mean of emerging from this repugnant and untenable position, revolt. A revolt in Paris would have permitted the proclamation of a state of siege in Paris and the departments, and thus control of the elections. On the other hand, the friends of order, in face of a government that had gained victory over anarchy, were constrained to make concessions, if they did not want to appear as anarchists themselves. The government set to work, at the beginning of February 1850, provocation of the people by chopping down the trees of liberty. In vain. If the trees of liberty lost their place, the government itself lost its head and fell back, frightened by its own provocation. The National Assembly, however, received this clumsy attempt at emancipation on the part of Bonaparte with ice-cold mistrust. The removal of the wreaths of immortelles from the July column was no more successful. It gave part of the army an opportunity for revolutionary demonstrations, and the National Assembly the occasion for more or less failed. Vote of no confidence in the ministry. In vain, the government press threatened the abolition of universal suffrage and the invasion of the Cossacks. In vain was Hautpoul's direct challenge, issued to the left in the Legislative Assembly itself, to betake itself to the streets, and his declaration that the government was ready to receive it. Hautpoul received nothing but a call to order from the president, and the party of order, with silent malicious joy, allowed a deputy of the left to mock Bonaparte's usurpatory longings. In vain, finally, was the prophecy of a revolution on February 24. The government caused February 24 to be ignored by the people. The proletariat did not allow itself to be provoked to revolt, because it was on the point of making a revolution, unhindered by the provocations of the government, which only heightened the general exasperation at the existing situation. The election committee, wholly under the influence of the workers, put forward 3 candidates for Paris: Deflat, Vidal, and Carnot. Deflat was a June deportee amnestied through one of Bonaparte's popularity seeking ideas. He was a friend of Blanqui and had taken part in the attempt of May 15th. Vidal, known as a communist writer through his book concerning the distribution of wealth, was formerly secretary to Louis Blanc in the Luxembourg Commission. Carnot, son of the man of the convention who had organized the victory, the least compromised member of the National Party, minister of education in the provisional government and the executive commission, was through his democratic public education bill, a living protest against the education law of the Jesuits. These 3 candidates represented the 3 allied classes. At the head, the June insurgent, the representative of the revolutionary proletariat. Next to him, the doctrinaire socialist, the representative of the socialist petty bourgeoisie. Finally, the third, the representative of the Republican bourgeois party, whose democratic formulas had gained a socialist significance vis the party of order and had long lost their own significance. This was a general coalition against the bourgeoisie and the government, as in February. But this time, the proletariat was at the head of the revolutionary league. In spite of all efforts, the socialist candidates won. The army itself voted for the June insurgent against its own war minister Lahite. The party of order was thunderstruck. The elections in the departments did not solace them. The departments gave a majority to the Montagnards. The election of March 10, 1850. It was the revocation of June 1848. The butchers and deportees of the June insurgents returned to the National Assembly, but returned bowed down in the train of the deported, and with their principles on their lips. It was the revocation of June 13, 1849. The Montagnier, prescribed by the National Assembly, returned to the National Assembly, but as advanced trumpeters of the revolution, no longer as its commanders. It was the revocation of December 10. Napoleon had lost out with his minister Lahite. The parliamentary history of France knows only one analogy: the rejection of Dowsez, minister of Charles X, in 1830. Finally, the election of March 10, 1850 was the cancellation of the election of May 13th, which had given the party of order a majority. The election of March 10 protested against the majority of May 13th. March 10th was a revolution. Behind the ballots lie the paving stones. The vote of March 10 means war, shouted Sigur D'Aguesseau, one of the most advanced members of the party of order. With March 10, 1850, the constitutional republic entered a new phase, the phase of its dissolution. The different factions of the majority are again united among themselves, and with Bonaparte, they are again the saviors of order. He is again their neutral man. If they remember that they are royalists, it happens only from despair of the possibility of a bourgeois republic. If he remembers that he is a pretender, it happens only because he despairs of remaining president. At the command of the party of order, Bonaparte answers the election of Deflat, the June insurgent, by appointing Baroche minister of internal affairs, Baroche. The accuser of Blanqui and Barbès of Ledru Rollin and Guinard. The Legislative Assembly answers the election of Carnot by adopting the education law, the election of Vidal by suppressing the socialist press. The party of order seeks to blare away its own fears by the trumpet blasts of its press. The sword is holy, cries one of its organs. The defenders of order must take the offensive against the Red Party, cries another. Between socialism and society there is a duel to the death. A war without surcease or mercy. In this duel of desperation, one or the other must go under. If society does not annihilate socialism, socialism will annihilate society, crows the third cock of order. Throw up the barricades of order, the barricades of religion, the barricades of the family. An end must be made of the 127,000 voters of Paris, a Bartholomew's night for the socialists, and the party of order believes for a moment in its own certainty of victory. Their organs hold forth most fanatically of all against the boutiquiers of Paris. The June insurgents of Paris elected by the shopkeepers of Paris as their representative. This means that a second June 1848 is impossible. This means that a second June 13, 1849 is impossible. This means that the moral influence of capital is broken. This means that the bourgeois assembly now represents only the bourgeoisie. This means that big property is lost because its vassal small property seeks its salvation in the camp of the propertyless. The party of order naturally returns to its inevitable commonplace. More repression, it cries, tenfold repression. But its power of repression has diminished tenfold, while resistance has increased 100-fold. Must not the chief instrument of repression, the army itself, be repressed? And the party of order speaks its last word. The iron ring of suffocating legality must be broken. The constitutional republic is impossible. We must fight with our true weapons since February 1848. We have fought the revolution with its weapons, and on its terrain, we have accepted its institutions. The constitution is a fortress which safeguards only the besiegers, not the besieged. By smuggling ourselves into holy alien in the belly of the Trojan horse, we have, unlike our forefathers the Greeks, not conquered the hostile town, but made prisoners of ourselves. The foundation of constitution, however, is universal suffrage. Annihilation of universal suffrage, such is the last word of the party of order, of the bourgeois dictatorship. On May 4th, 1848, on December 20th, 1848, on May 13th, 1849, and on July 8th, 1849, universal suffrage admitted that they were right. On March 10th, 1850, universal suffrage admitted that it had itself been wrong. Bourgeois rule as the outcome and result of universal suffrage, as the express act of the sovereign will of the people. That is the meaning of the bourgeois constitution. But has the constitution any further meaning from the moment that the content of this suffrage, of this sovereign will, is no longer bourgeois rule? Is it not the duty of the bourgeoisie so to regulate the suffrage that it wills the reasonable its rule? By ever and anon putting an end to the existing state power and creating a new out of itself, does not universal suffrage put an end to all stability? Does it not every moment question all the powers that be? Does it not annihilate authority? Does it not threaten to elevate anarchy itself to the position of authority? After March 10th, 1850, who would still doubt it? By repudiating universal suffrage, with which it hitherto draped itself and from which it sucked its omnipotence, the bourgeoisie openly confesses. Our dictatorship has hitherto existed by the will of the people. It must now be consolidated against the will of the people. And consistently it seeks its props no longer within France, but without, in foreign countries, in invasion. With the invasion, the second Koblenz, its seat established in France itself, rouses all the national passions against itself. With the attack on universal suffrage, it provides a general pretext for the new revolution, and the revolution requires such a pretext. Every special pretext would divide the factions of the revolutionary league and give prominence to their differences. The general pretext stuns the semi-revolutionary classes. It permits them to deceive themselves concerning the definite character of the coming revolution, concerning the consequences of their own act. Every revolution requires a question for discussion of banquets. Universal suffrage is the banquet question of the new revolution. The bourgeois factions in coalition, however, are already condemned, since they take flight from the only possible form of their united power. From the most potent and complete form of their class rule, the constitutional republic, back to the subordinate, incomplete, weaker form of monarchy. They resemble the old man who, in order to regain his youthful strength, fetched out his boyhood garments and suffered torment trying to get his withered limbs into them. The republic had the sole merit of being the hothouse of the revolution. March 10, 1850, bears the inscription: Après moi le déluge, after me the deluge. Part 4. The abolition of universal suffrage in 1850. The same symptoms have shown themselves in France since 1849, and particularly since the beginning of 1850. The Parisian industries are abundantly employed, and the cotton factories of Rouen and Mulhouse are also doing pretty well, although here, as in England, the high prices of the raw material have exercised a retarding influence. The development of prosperity in France was, in addition, especially promoted by the comprehensive tariff reform in Spain and by the reduction of the duties on various luxury articles. In Mexico, the export of French commodities to both markets has considerably increased. The growth of capital in France led to a series of speculations, for which the exploitation of the California gold mines on a large scale served as a pretext. A swarm of companies have sprung up. The low denomination of their shares and their socialist-colored prospectuses appeal directly to the purses of the petty bourgeois and the workers. But all in sundry results in that sheer swindling which is characteristic of the French and Chinese alone. One of these companies is even patronized directly by the government. The import duties in France during the first 9 months of 1848 amounted to 63 million francs, of 1849 to 95 million francs, and of 1850 to 93 million francs. Moreover, in the month of September 1850, they again rose by more than a million compared with the same month of 1849. Exports also rose in 1849 and still more in 1850. The most striking proof of restored prosperity is the bank's reintroduction of specie payment by the law of August 6, 1850. On March 15, 1848, the bank had been authorized to suspend specie payment. Its note circulation, including that of the provincial banks, amounted at that time to 373 million francs, 14,920,000 pounds. On November 2, 1849, this circulation amounted to 482 million francs, or 19,280,000, an increase of 4,360,000 pounds. And on September 2, 1850, to 496 million francs, or 19,840,000 pounds, an increase of about 5 million pounds. This was not accompanied by any depreciation of the notes. On the contrary, the increased circulation of the notes was accompanied by the steadily increasing accumulation of gold and silver in the vaults of the bank. So that in the summer of 1850, its metallic reserve amounted to about 141 million pounds, an unprecedented sum in France. That the bank was thus placed in a positioned to increase its circulation and therewith its active capital by 123 million francs, or 5 million pounds, is striking proof of the correctness of our assertion in an earlier issue that the finance aristocracy has not only not been overthrown by the revolution, but has even been strengthened. This result becomes still more evident from the following survey of French bank legislation during the last few years. On June 10, 1847, the bank was authorized to issue notes of 200 francs. Hitherto, the smallest denomination had been 500 francs. A decree of March 15, 1848, declared the notes of the Bank of France legal tender and relieved it of the obligation of redeeming them in specie. Its note issue was limited to 350 million francs. It was simultaneously authorized to issue notes of 100 francs. A decree of April 27 prescribed the merging of the departmental banks in the Bank of France. Another decree of May 2, 1848, increased the latter's note issue to 442 million francs. A decree of December 22, 1849, raised the maximum of the note issue to 525 million francs. Finally, the law of August 6, 1850, re-established the exchangeability of notes for specie. These facts, the continual increase in the circulation, the concentration of the whole of French credit in the hands of the bank, and the accumulation of all French gold and silver in the bank's vaults led M. Proudhon to the conclusion that the bank must now shed its old snakeskin and metamorphose itself into a proud honest people's bank. He did not even need to know the history of the English bank restriction from 1797 to 1819. He only needed to direct his glance across the channel, see that this fact, for him unprecedented in the history of bourgeois society, was nothing more than a very normal bourgeois event which only now occurred in France for the first time. One sees that the allegedly revolutionary theoreticians who, after the provisional government, talked big in Paris were just as ignorant of the nature and the results of the measures taken as the gentlemen of the provisional government themselves. In spite of the industrial and commercial prosperity that France momentarily enjoys, the mass of the people, the 25 million peasants, suffer from a great depression. The good harvest of the past few years have forced the prices of corn much lower even than in England, and the position of the peasants under such circumstances, in debt, sucked dry by usury and crushed by taxes, must be anything but splendid. The history of the past 3 years has, however, provided sufficient proof that this class of the population is absolutely incapable of any revolutionary initiative. Just as the period of crisis began later on the continent than in England, so also did prosperity. The process originated in England, which is the demiurge of the bourgeois cosmos. On the continent, the various phases of the cycle repeatedly experienced by bourgeois society assume a secondary and tertiary form. First, the continent exports to England disproportionately more than to any other country. This export to England, however, depends on the latter's position, especially in regard to the overseas market. England exports disproportionately more to overseas countries than to the whole continent, so that the quantity of continental exports to those countries is always dependent on England's foreign trade. Hence, when crises on the continent produce revolutions there first, the basis for them are always laid in England. Violent outbreaks naturally erupt sooner at the extremities of the bourgeois body than in its heart, because in the latter the possibilities of accommodation are greater than in the former. On the other hand, the degree to which continental revolutions affect England is at the same time the thermometer that indicates to what extent these revolutions really put into question bourgeois life conditions, and to what extent they touch only the political formations. Given this general prosperity, wherein the productive forces of bourgeois society are developing as luxuriantly as it is possible for them to do within bourgeois relationships, a real revolution is out of the question. Such a revolution is possible only in periods when both of these factors, the modern forces of production and the bourgeois forms of production, come into opposition with each other. The various bickerings in which representatives of the individual factions of the continental party of order presently engage and compromise each other, far from providing occasion for revolution, are, on the contrary, possible only because the basis of relationships are momentarily so secure and what the reactionaries do not know, so bourgeois. On this, all the reactionary attempts to hold back bourgeois development will rebound just as much as will all the ethical indignation and all the enraptured proclamations of the Democrats. A new revolution is only a consequence of a new crisis. The one, however, is as sure to come as the other. Let us now turn to France. The victory that the people, in conjunction with the petty bourgeois, had won in the elections of March 10 was annulled by the people itself when it provoked the new election of April 28. Vidal was elected not only in Paris but also in the Lower Rhine. The Paris Committee, in which the Montaigne and the petty bourgeoisie were strongly represented, induced him to accept for the Lower Rhine. The victory of March 10 ceased to be a decisive one. The date of the decision was once more postponed. The tension of the people was relaxed. It became accustomed to legal triumphs instead of revolutionary ones. The revolutionary meaning of March 10th, the rehabilitation of the June insurrection, was finally completely annihilated by the candidature of Eugene Sue, the sentimental petty bourgeois social fantast, which the proletariat could at best accept as a joke to please the grisettes. As against this well-meaning candidature, the party of order, emboldened by the vacillating policy of its opponents, put up a candidate who was to represent the June victory. This comic candidate was the Spartan paterfamilias Leclerc, from whose person, however, the heroic armor was torn piece by the press, and who experienced a brilliant defeat in the election. The new election victory on April 28 put the Montaigne and the petty bourgeoisie in high feather. They already exulted in the thought of being able to arrive at the goal of their wishes in a purely legal way and without again pushing the proletariat into the foreground through a new revolution. They reckoned positively on bringing Ledru Rollin into the presidential chair, and a majority of Montagnards into the assembly through universal suffrage in the new elections of 1852. The party of order, rendered perfectly certain by the prospective elections, by Sue's candidature, and by the mood of the Montaigne and the petty bourgeoisie, that the latter were resolved to remain quiet no matter what happened, answered the two election victories with an election law which abolished universal suffrage. The government took good care not to make this legislative proposal on its own responsibility. It made an apparent concession to the majority by entrusting the working out of the bill to the high dignitaries of this majority, the 17 burgraves. Thus it was not the government that proposed the repeal of universal suffrage to the assembly. The majority of the assembly proposed it to itself. On May 8, the project was brought into the chamber. The entire social democratic press rose as one man in order to preach to the people dignified bearing, calm and modesty, passivity, and trust in its representatives. Every article of these journals was confession that a revolution would, above all, annihilate the so-called revolutionary press, and that therefore it was now a question of its self-preservation. The allegedly revolutionary press betrayed its whole secret. It signed its own death warrant. On May 21st, the Montaigne put the preliminary question to debate and moved the rejection of the whole project on the ground that it violated the Constitution. The party of order answered that the Constitution would be violated if it were necessary. There was, however, no need for this at present, because the Constitution was capable of every interpretation, and because the majority alone was competent to decide on the correct interpretation. To the unbridled savage attacks of Thiers and Montalembert, the Montaigne opposed a decorous and refined humanism. It took its stand on the ground of law. The party of order referred it to the ground on which the law grows, to bourgeois property. The Montaigne whimpered, did they really want then to conjure up revolutions by main force? The party of order replied, one would await them. On May 22, the preliminary question was settled by 462 votes to 227. The same men who had proved with such solemn profundity that the National Assembly and every individual deputy would be renouncing his mandate if he renounced the people, his mandatory, now stuck to their seats and suddenly sought to let the country act through petitions at that, instead of acting themselves, and still sat there unmoved when, on May 31st, the law went through in splendid fashion. They sought to revenge themselves by a protest in which they reported their innocence of the rape of the Constitution, a protest which they did not even submit openly, but smuggled into the president's pocket from the rear. An army of 150,000 men in Paris, the long deferment of the decision, the appeasing attitude of the press, the pusillanimity of the Montaigne and of the newly elected representatives, the majestic calm of the petty bourgeois, but above all, the commercial and industrial prosperity prevented any attempt at revolution on the part of the proletariat. Universal suffrage had fulfilled its mission. The majority of the people had passed through the school of development, which is all that universal suffrage can serve for in a revolutionary period. It had to be set aside by a revolution or by the reaction. The Montaigne developed a still greater display of energy on an occasion that arose soon afterward. From the Tribune war minister, Hopeful had termed the February Revolution a baneful catastrophe. The orders of the Montaigne, who, as always, distinguished themselves by their morally indignant bluster, were not allowed by the president, Dupin, to speak. Jourdan proposed to Montaigne that it should walk out at once en masse. Result: the Montaigne remained seated, but Jourdan was cast out from its midst as unworthy. The election law still needed one thing to complete it: a new press law. This was not long in coming. A proposal of the government made many times more drastic by amendments of the party of order increased the caution money, put an extra stamp on feuilleton, fiction. Election of Eugene Sue, taxed all publications appearing weekly or monthly up to a certain number of sheets, and finally provided that every article of the journal must bear the signature of the author. The provisions concerning the caution money killed the so-called revolutionary press. The people regarded its extinction as satisfaction for the abolition of universal suffrage. However, neither the tendency nor the effect of the new law extended only to the section of the press. As long as the newspaper press was anonymous, it appeared as the organ of a numberless and nameless public opinion. It was the third power in the state. Through the signature of every article, a newspaper became a mere collection of literary contributions from more or less known individuals. Every article sank to the level of an advertisement. Hitherto the newspapers had circulated as the paper money of public opinion. Now they were resolved into more or less bad solo bills, whose worth and circulation depended on the credit not only of the drawer but also of the endorser. The press of the party of order had incited not only for the repeal of universal suffrage but also for the most extreme measures against the bad press. However, in its sinister anonymity, even the good press was irksome. More to its individual provincial representatives. As for itself, it demanded only the paid writer, with name, address, and description. In vain, the good press bemoaned the ingratitude with which its services were rewarded. The law went through. The provision about the giving of names hit it hardest of all. The names of Republican journalists were rather well known, but the respectable firms of the Journal des Débats, the Assemblée Nationale, the Constitutionnelle, etc., cut a sorry figure in their high protestations of state wisdom when the mysterious company all at once disintegrated into purchasable penny liners of long practice, who had defended all possible causes for cash, like Garnier de Cassagnac, or into old milksops who called themselves statesmen, like Hayfig, or into coquettish fops, like M. Lemoyne of the Débats. In the debate on the press law, the Montaigne had already sunk to such a level of moral degeneracy that it had to confine itself to applauding the brilliant tirades of an old notable of Louis Philippe's time, M. Victor Hugo. With the election law and the press law, the revolutionary and democratic party exits from the official stage. Before their departure home shortly after the end of the session, the two factions of the Montaigne, the Socialist Democrats, and the Democratic Socialists, too, issued two manifestos, testimony of opportunism, in which they proved that while power and success were never on their side, they nonetheless had ever been on the side of eternal justice and all the other eternal truths. Let us now consider the party of order. The new Rheinische Zeitung had said, as against the hankering for restoration on the part of the United Orleanists and Legitimists, Bonaparte defends his title to his actual power, the Republic, as against the hankering for restoration on the part of Bonaparte. The party of order defends its title to its common rule, the Republic, as against the Orleanists, the Legitimists, and as against the Legitimists, the Orleanists defend the status quo, the Republic. All these factions of the party of order, each of which has its own king and its own restoration impeto, mutually enforce, as against their rivals hankering for usurpation and revolt. The common rule of the bourgeoisie, the form in which the special claims remain neutralized and reserved, the Republic. And Thiers spoke more truly than he suspects when he said, "We, the Royalists, are the true pillars of the constitutional Republic." This comedy of the Republicans malgré you, the antipathy to the status quo and the constant consolidation of it, the incessant friction between Bonaparte and the National Assembly, the ever-renewed threat of the party of order to split into its separate component parts, and the ever-repeated conjugation of its factions. The attempt of each faction to transform each victory of the common foe into a defeat for its temporary allies. The mutual petty jealousy, chicanery, harassment, the tireless drawing of swords that ever and again ends with a Baser Lamourette. This whole unedifying comedy of errors never developed. More classically than during the past 6 months, the party of order regarded the election law at the same time as a victory over Bonaparte. Had not the government abdicated when it handed over the editing of and responsibility for its own proposal to the Commission of 17? And did not the chief strength of Bonaparte as against the Assembly lie in the fact that he was the chosen of 6 millions? Bonaparte, on his part, treated the election law as a concession to the Assembly, with which he claimed to have purchased harmony between the legislative and executive powers. As reward, the vulgar adventurer demanded an increase of 3 millions in his civil list. Dared the National Assembly enter into a conflict with the executive at a moment when it had excommunicated the great majority of Frenchmen? It was roused to anger. It appeared to want to go to extremes. Its commission rejected the motion. The Bonapartist press threatened and referred to the disinherited people. Deprived of its franchise, numerous noisy attempts at an arrangement took place, and the Assembly finally gave way in fact, but at the same time revenged itself in principle. Instead of increasing the civil list in principle by 3 millions per annum, it granted Bonaparte an accommodation of 2,160,000 francs. Not satisfied with this, it made even this concession only after it had been supported by Changarnier, the general of the party of order and the protector thrust upon Bonaparte. Therefore, it really granted the 2 millions not to Bonaparte, but to Changarnier. This SOP thrown to him to Mauvaise grace was accepted by Bonaparte quite in the spirit of the donor. The Bonapartist press blustered anew against the National Assembly, when in the debate on the press law the amendment was made on the signing of names, which, in turn, was directed especially against the less important papers. The interests of Bonaparte, the principal Bonapartist paper, the Pouvoir, published an open and vehement attack on the National Assembly. The ministers had to disavow the paper before the Assembly. The adjourned of the Pouvoir was summoned before the bar of the National Assembly and sentenced to pay the highest fine, 5,000 francs. Next day, the Pouvoir published a still more insolent article against the Assembly, and as the revenge of the government, the public prosecutor promptly prosecuted a number of legitimist journals for violating the Constitution. Finally, there came the question of proroguing the Assembly. Bonaparte desired this in order to be able to operate unhindered by the Assembly. The party of order desired it partly for the purpose of carrying on its factional intrigues, partly for the pursuit of the private interests of the individual deputies. Both needed it in order to consolidate and push further the victories of reaction in the provinces. The Assembly therefore adjourned from August 11th until November 11th. Since, however, Bonaparte in no way concealed that his only concern was to get rid of the irksome surveillance of the National Assembly, the Assembly imprinted on the vote of confidence itself a stamp of lack of confidence in the president. All Bonapartists were kept off the permanent commission of 28 members who stayed on during recess as guardians of the virtue of the Republic. In their stead, even some Republicans of the Sequel and the National were elected to it, in order to prove to the president the attachment of the majority to the constitutional Republic. Shortly before, and especially immediately after the recess, the two big factions of the party of order, the Orleanists and the Legitimists, appeared to want to be reconciled, and this by a fusion of the two royal houses under whose flags they were fighting. The papers were full of reconciliation proposals that were said to have been discussed at the sickbed of Louis Philippe at St. Leonard's, when the death of Louis Philippe suddenly simplified the situation. Louis Philippe was the usurper, Henry V the dispossessed, the Count of Paris on the other hand, owing to the childlessness of Henry V, was his lawful heir to the throne. Every pretext for objecting to a fusion of the two dynastic interests was now removed. But precisely now the two factions of the bourgeoisie first discovered that it was not zeal for a definite royal house that divided them, but that it was rather their divided class interests that kept the two dynasties apart. The Legitimists, who had made a pilgrimage to the residence of Henry V at Wiesbaden, just as their competitors had to St. Leonard's, received there the news of Louis Philippe's death. Forthwith they formed a ministry in partibus infidiem, which consisted mostly of members of that commission of guardians of the virtue of the Republic, in which on the occasion of a squabble in the bosom of the party came out with the most outspoken proclamation of right by the grace of God. The Orleanists rejoiced over the compromising scandal that this manifesto called forth in the press, and did not conceal for a moment their open enmity to the Legitimists. During the adjournment of the National Assembly, the councils of the departments met. The majority of them declared for a or less qualified revision of the Constitution. That is, they declared for a not definitely specified monarchist restoration, for a solution, and confessed at the same time that they were too incompetent and too cowardly to find this solution. The Bonapartist faction at once construed this desire for revision in the sense of a prolongation of Bonaparte's presidency. The constitutional solution, the retirement of Bonaparte in May 1852, the simultaneous election of a new president by all the electors of the land, the revision of the Constitution by chamber revision during the first months of the new presidency, is utterly inadmissible for the ruling class. The day of the new presidential election would be the day of rendezvous for all the hostile parties, the Legitimists, the Orleanists, the bourgeois Republicans, the revolutionists. It would have to come to a violent decision between the different factions. Even if the party of order should succeed in uniting around the candidature of a neutral person outside the dynastic families, he would still be opposed by Bonaparte. In its struggle with the people, the party of order is compelled constantly to increase the power of the executive. Every increase of the executive's power increases the power of its bearer, Bonaparte. In the same measure, therefore, as the party of order strengthens its joint might, it strengthens the fighting resources of Bonaparte's dynastic pretensions. It strengthens his chance of frustrating a constitutional solution by force on the day of the decision. He will then have, as against the party of order, no more scruples about the one pillar of the Constitution than that party had, as against the people, about the other pillar in the matter of the election law. He would, seemingly even against the Assembly, appeal to universal suffrage. In a word, the constitutional solution questions the entire political status quo, and behind the jeopardizing of the status quo, the bourgeois sees chaos, anarchy, civil war. He sees his purchases and sales, his promissory notes, his marriages, his agreements duly acknowledged before a notary, his mortgages, his ground rents, house rents, profits, all his contracts and sources of income called in question on the first Sunday in May 1852, and he cannot expose himself to this risk. Behind the jeopardizing of the political status quo lurks the danger of the collapse of the entire bourgeois society. The only possible solution in the framework of the bourgeoisie is the postponement of the solution. It can save the constitutional republic only by violation of the Constitution, by the prolongation of the power of the president. This is also the last word of the press of order, after the protracted and profound debates on the solutions in which it indulged after the session of the general councils. The high and mighty party of order thus finds itself, to its shame, compelled to take seriously the ridiculous commonplace and to it odious person of the pseudo Bonaparte. This dirty figure likewise deceived himself about the causes that clothed him more and more with the character of the indispensable man, while his party had sufficient insight to ascribe the growing importance of Bonaparte to circumstances. He believed that he owed it solely to the magic power of his name and his continual caricaturing of Napoleon. He became more enterprising every day. To offset the pilgrimages to St. Leonard's and Wiesbaden, he made his round trips through France. The Bonapartists had so little faith in the magic effect of his personality that they sent with him everywhere as clackers people from the Society of December 10th, that organization of the Paris lumpen proletariat, packed en masse into railway trains and post chaises. They put speeches into the mouth of their marionette which, according to the reception in the different towns, proclaimed Republican resignation or perennial tenacity as the keynote of the president's policy. In spite of all maneuvers, these journeys were anything but triumphal processions. When Bonaparte believed he had thus made the people enthusiastic, he set out to win the army. He caused great reviews to be held on the plain of State near Versailles, at which he sought to buy the soldiers with garlic sausages, champagne, and cigars. Whereas the genuine Napoleon, amid the hardships of his campaigns of conquest, knew how to cheer up his weary soldiers with outbursts of patriarchal familiarity, the pseudo-Napoleon believed it was ingratitude. But the troops shouted, "Vive Napoleon, vive le saucisson," that is, hurrah for the worst, hurrah for the Hanswurst. These reviews led to the outbreak of the long-suppressed dissension between Bonaparte and his war minister Hopeful on the one hand, and Changarnier on the other. In Changarnier, the party of order had found its real neutral man, in whose case there could be no question of his own dynastic claims. It had designated him Bonaparte's successor. In addition, Changarnier had become the great general of the party of order through his conduct on January 29 and June 13, 1849. The modern Alexander, whose brutal intervention had, in the eyes of the timid bourgeois, cut the Gordian knot of the revolution. At bottom, just as ridiculous as Bonaparte, he had thus become a power in the very cheapest manner and was set up by the National Assembly to watch the president. He himself coquetted, for example, in the matter of the salary grant, with the protection that he gave Bonaparte, and rose up ever more overpoweringly against him and the ministers. When, on the occasion of the election law, an insurrection was expected, he forbade his officers to take any orders whatever from the war minister or the president. The press was also instrumental in magnifying the figure of Changarnier, with the complete absence of great personalities. The party of order naturally found itself compelled to endow a single individual with the strength lacking in its class as a whole, and so puff up this individual to a prodigy. Thus arose the myth of Changarnier, the bulwark of society. The arrogant charlatanry, the secretive air of importance with which Changarnier condescended to carry the world on his shoulders, forms the most ridiculous contrast to the events during and after the stage review, which irrefutably proves that it needed only a stroke of the pen by Bonaparte the infinitely little to bring this fantastic offspring of bourgeois fear, the Colossus Changarnier, back to the dimensions of mediocrity and transform him, society's heroic savior, pensions general, into a Bonaparte had for some time been revenging himself on Changarnier by provoking the war minister to disputes in matters of discipline with the irksome protector. The last review at Satre finally brought the old animosity to a climax. The constitutional indignation of Changarnier knew no bounds when he saw the cavalry regiment's file past with the unconstitutional cry, "Vive l'Empereur!" in order to forestall any unpleasant debate on this cry in the coming session of the chamber. Bonaparte removed war minister Hopeful by appointing him governor of Algiers. In his place, he put a reliable old general of the time of the empire, one who was fully matched for Changarnier in brutality. But so that the dismissal of Hopeful might not appear as a concession to Changarnier, he simultaneously transferred General Numere, the right hand of the great savior of society, from Paris to Nantes. It was Numere who at the last review had induced the whole of the infantry to file past the successor of Napoleon in icy silence. Changarnier himself attacked in the person of Numere, protested and threatened, to no purpose. After 2 days' negotiations, the decree transferring Numere appeared in the Moniteur, and there was nothing left for the hero of order but to submit to discipline or resign. Bonaparte's struggle with Changarnier is a continuation of his struggle with the party of order. The reopening of the National Assembly on November 11th will therefore take place under threatening auspices. It will be a storm in a teacup. In essence, the old game must go on. Meanwhile, the majority of the party of order will, despite the clamor of the sticklers for principle and its different factions, be compelled to prolong the power of the president. Similarly, Bonaparte, already humbled by lack of money, will, despite all preliminary protestations, accept this prolongation of power from the hands of the National Assembly as simply delegated to him. Thus the solution is postponed, the status quo continued. One faction of the party of order compromised, weakened, made unworkable by the other. The repression of the common enemy, the mass of the nation, extended and exhausted until the economic relations themselves have again reached the point of development where a new explosion blows into the air all these squabbling parties with their constitutional republic. For the peace of mind of the bourgeois, it must be said, however, that the scandal between Bonaparte and the party of order has the result of ruining a multitude of small capitalists on the bourse and putting their assets into the pockets of the big wolves of the bourse. Address of the Central Committee to the Communist League, anonymous translation. London, March 1850. Brothers, in the 2 revolutionary years of 1848-49, the League proved itself in 2 ways. First, its members everywhere involved themselves energetically in the movement and stood in the front ranks of the only decisively revolutionary class, the proletariat in the press, on the barricades and on the battlefields. The League further proved itself in that its understanding of the movement, as expressed in the circulars issued by the Congresses and the Central Committee of 1847 and in the manifesto of the Communist Party, has been shown to be the only correct one, and the expectations expressed in these documents have been completely fulfilled. This previously only propagated by the League in secret is now on everyone's lips and is preached openly in the marketplace. At the same time, however, the formerly strong organization of the League has been considerably weakened. A large number of members who were directly involved in the movement thought that the time for secret societies was over and that public action alone was sufficient. The individual districts and communes allowed their connections with the Central Committee to weaken and gradually become dormant. So while the Democratic Party, the party of the petty bourgeoisie, has become more and more organized in Germany, the Workers' Party has lost its only firm foothold, remaining organized at best in individual localities for local purposes. Within the general movement, it has consequently come under the complete domination and leadership of the petty bourgeois Democrats. This situation cannot be allowed to continue. The independence of the workers must be restored. The Central Committee recognized this necessity, and it therefore sent an emissary, Joseph Moll, to Germany in the winter of 1848-9 to reorganize the League. Moll's mission, however, failed to produce any lasting effect, partly because the German workers at that time had not enough experience, and partly because it was interrupted by the insurrection last May. Moll himself took up arms, joined the Baden-Palatinate army, and fell on 29 June in the Battle of the River Merg. The League lost in him one of the oldest, most active, and most reliable members who had been involved in all the Congress committees and had Central earlier conducted a series of missions with great success. Since the defeat of the German and French revolutionary parties in July 1849, almost all the members of the Central Committee have reassembled in London. They have replenished their numbers with new revolutionary forces and set about reorganizing the League with renewed zeal. This reorganization can only be achieved by an emissary, and the Central Committee considers it most important to dispatch the emissary at this very moment, when a new revolution is imminent. That is, when the Workers' Party must go into battle with the maximum degree of organization, unity, and independence, so that it is not exploited and taken in tow by the bourgeoisie as in 1848. We told you already in 1848, brothers, that the German liberal bourgeoisie would soon come to power and would immediately turn its newly won power against the workers. You have seen how this forecast came true. It was indeed the bourgeoisie which took possession of the state authority in the wake of the March movement of 1848 and used its power to drive the workers, its allies in the struggle, back into their former oppressed position. Although the bourgeoisie could accomplish this only by entering into an alliance with the feudal party, which had been defeated in March, and eventually even had to surrender power once more to this feudal absolutist party, it has nevertheless secured favorable conditions for itself. In view of the government's financial difficulties, these conditions would ensure that power would in the long run fall into its hands again, and that all its interests would be secured. If it were possible for the revolutionary movement to assume from now on a so-called peaceful course of development, in order to guarantee its power, the bourgeoisie would not even need to arouse hatred by taking violent measures against the people, as all of these violent measures have already been carried out by the feudal counter-revolution. But events will not take this peaceful course. On the contrary, the revolution which will accelerate the course of events is imminent. Whether it is initiated by an independent rising of the French proletariat or by an invasion of the revolutionary Babel by the Holy Alliance, the treacherous role that the German liberal bourgeoisie played against the people in 1848 will be assumed in the coming revolution by the democratic petty bourgeoisie, which now occupies the same position in the opposition as the liberal bourgeoisie did before 1848. This democratic party, which is far more dangerous for the workers than were the liberals earlier, is composed of 3 elements. 1. The most progressive elements of the big bourgeoisie, who pursue the goal of the immediate and complete overthrow of feudalism and absolutism. This fraction is represented by the former Berlin Vereinbarer, the tax resisters. 2. The constitutional, democratic petty bourgeois, whose main aim during the previous movement was the formation of a more or less democratic federal state. This is what their representative, the left, in the Frankfurt Assembly and later the Stuttgart Parliament worked for, as they themselves did in the Right Constitution campaign. 3. The Republican petty bourgeois, whose ideal is a German federal republic similar to that in Switzerland, and who now call themselves red and social democratic because they cherish the pious wish to abolish the pressure exerted by big capital and small capital by the big bourgeoisie on the petty bourgeoisie. The representatives of this fraction were the members of the democratic congresses and committees, the leaders of the democratic associations, and the editors of the democratic newspapers. After their defeat, all these fractions claimed to be Republicans or Reds, just as at the present time members of the Republican petty bourgeoisie in France call themselves socialists. Where, as in Württemberg, Bavaria, etc., they still find a chance to pursue their ends by constitutional means, they seize the opportunity to retain their old phrases and prove by their actions that they have not changed in the least. Furthermore, it goes without saying that the changed name of this party does not alter in the least its relationship to the workers, but merely proves that it is now obliged to form a front against the bourgeoisie, which has united with absolutism and to seek the support of the proletariat. The petty bourgeois democratic party in Germany is very powerful. It not only embraces the great majority of the urban middle class, the small industrial merchants and master craftsmen, it also includes among its followers the peasants and rural proletariat insofar as the latter has not yet found support among the independent proletariat of the towns. The relationship of the revolutionary workers' party to the petty bourgeois democrats is this: it cooperates with them against the party which they aim to overthrow. It opposes them wherever they wish to secure their own position. The democratic petty bourgeois, far from wanting to transform the whole society in the interests of the revolutionary proletarians, only aspire to a change in social conditions which will make the existing society as tolerable and comfortable for themselves as possible. They therefore demand above all else a reduction in government spending through a restriction of the bureaucracy and the transference of the major tax burden into the large landowners and bourgeoisie. They further demand the removal of the pressure exerted by big capital and small capital through the establishment of public credit institutions and the passing of laws against usury, whereby it would be possible for themselves and the peasants to receive advances on favorable terms from the state instead of from capitalists. Also, the introduction of bourgeois property relationships on land through the complete abolition of feudalism. In order to achieve all this, they require a democratic form of government, either constitutional or republican, which would give them and their peasant allies the majority. They also require a democratic system of local government to give them direct control over municipal property and over a series of political offices at present in the hands of the bureaucrats. The rule of capital and its rapid accumulation is to be further counteracted, partly by curtailment of the right of inheritance, and partly by the transference of as much employment as possible to the state. As far as the workers are concerned, one thing above all is definite: they are to remain wage laborers as before. However, the democratic petty bourgeois want better wages and security for the workers, and hope to achieve this by an extension of state employment and by welfare measures. In short, they hope to bribe the workers with a more or less disguised form of alms, and to break their revolutionary strength by temporarily rendering their situation tolerable. The demands of petty bourgeois democracy summarized here are not expressed by all sections of it at once, and in their totality they are the explicit goal of only a very few of its followers. The further particular individuals or fractions of the petty bourgeoisie advance, the more of these demands they will explicitly adopt. And the few who recognize their own program in what has been mentioned above might well believe they have put forward the maximum that can be demanded from the revolution. But these demands can in no way satisfy the party of the proletariat, while the democratic petty bourgeois want to bring the revolution to an end as quickly as possible, achieving most of the aims already mentioned. It is our interest and our task to make the revolution permanent until all the more or less property classes have been driven from their ruling positions, until the proletariat has conquered state power, and until the association of the proletarians has progressed sufficiently far, not only in one country but in all the leading countries of the world, that competition between the proletarians of these countries ceases and at least the decisive forces of production are concentrated in the hands of the workers. Our concern cannot simply be to modify private property, but to abolish it, not to hush up class antagonisms, but to abolish classes, not to improve the existing society, but to found a new one. There is no doubt that during the further course of the revolution in Germany, the petty bourgeois democrats will for the moment acquire a predominant influence. The question is therefore, what is to be the attitude of the proletariat, and in particular of the League towards them? 1. While present conditions continue, in which the petty bourgeois democrats are also oppressed. 2. In the coming revolutionary struggle, which will put them in a dominant position. 3. After the struggle. During the period of petty bourgeois predominance over the classes which have been overthrown and over the proletariat. 1. At the moment, while the democratic petty bourgeois are everywhere oppressed, they preach To the proletariat general unity and reconciliation, they extend the hand of friendship and seek to found a great opposition party which will embrace all shades of democratic opinion. That is, they seek to ensnare the workers in a party organization in which general social democratic phrases prevail while their particular interests are kept hidden behind, and in which, for the sake of preserving the peace, the specific demands of the proletariat may not be presented. Such a unity would be to their advantage alone and to the complete disadvantage of the proletariat. The proletariat would lose all its hard-won independent position and be reduced once more to a mere appendage of official bourgeois democracy. This unity must therefore be resisted in the most decisive manner. Instead of lowering themselves to the level of an applauding chorus, the workers and above all the League must work for the creation of an independent organization of the Workers' Party, both secret and open. And alongside the official Democrats, and the League must aim to make every one of its communes a center and nucleus of workers' associations, in which the position proletariat can be discussed free from bourgeois influence. How serious the bourgeois Democrats are about an alliance in which the proletariat has an interest of the equal power and equal rights is demonstrated by the Brussels Democrats, who are conducting a furious campaign in their organ, the New Oder Zeitung, against independently organized workers, whom they call socialists. In the event of a struggle against a common and special alliance enemy is unnecessary, as soon as such an enemy has to be fought directly. The interests of both parties will coincide for the moment, and an association of momentary expedience will arise spontaneously in the future, as it has in the past. It goes without saying that in the bloody conflicts to come, as in all others, it will be the workers, with their courage, resolution, and self-sacrifice, who will be chiefly responsible for achieving victory. As in the past, so in the coming struggle also, the petty bourgeoisie to a man will hesitate as long as possible and remain fearful, irresolute, inactive. But when victory is certain, it will claim it for itself and will call upon the workers to behave in an orderly fashion, to return to work and to prevent so-called excesses. And it will exclude the proletariat from the fruits of victory. It does not lie within the power of the workers to prevent the petty bourgeois Democrats from doing this, but it does lie within their power to make it as difficult as possible for the petty bourgeoisie to use its power against the armed and proletariat, and to dictate such conditions to them that the rule of the bourgeois Democrats from the very first will carry within it the seeds of its own destruction, and its subsequent displacement by the proletariat will be made considerably easier. Above all, during immediately after the struggle, the workers, as far as it is at all possible, must oppose bourgeois attempts at pacification and force the Democrats to carry out their terroristic phrases. They must work to ensure that the immediate revolutionary excitement is not suddenly suppressed after the victory. On the contrary, it must be sustained as long as possible, far from opposing the so-called excesses. Instances of popular vengeance against hated individuals or against public buildings with which hateful memories are associated. The Workers' Party must not only tolerate these actions, but must even give them direction. During and after the struggle, the workers must at every opportunity put forward their own demands against those of the bourgeois Democrats. They must demand guarantees for the workers as soon as the democratic bourgeoisie sets about taking over government. They must achieve these guarantees by force if necessary, and generally make sure that the new rulers commit themselves to all possible concessions and promises, the surest means of compromising them. They must check in every way, and as far as is possible, the victory, euphoria, and enthusiasm for the new situation which follow every successful street battle. With a cool and cold-blooded analysis of the situation and with undisguised mistrust of the new government. Alongside the new official governments, they must simultaneously establish their own revolutionary workers' governments, either in the form of local executive committees and councils, or through workers' clubs or committees, so that the bourgeois democratic governments not only immediately lost the support of the workers, but find themselves from the very beginning supervised and threatened by authorities behind which stand the whole mass of the workers. In a word, from the very moment of victory, the workers' suspicion must be directed no longer against the defeated reactionary party, but against their former ally, against the party which intends to exploit the common victory for itself. 2. To be able forcefully and threateningly to oppose this party, whose betrayal of the workers will begin with the very first hour of victory, the workers must be armed and organized. The whole proletariat must be armed at once with muskets, rifles, cannon, and ammunition, and the revival of the old-style citizens' militia directed against the workers must be opposed. Where the formation of this militia cannot be prevented, the workers must try to organize themselves independently as a proletarian guard, with elected leaders and with their own elected general staff. They must try to place themselves not under the orders of the state authority, but of the revolutionary local councils set up by the workers. Where the workers are employed by the state, they must arm and organize themselves into special corps with elected leaders, or as a part of the proletarian guard. Under no pretext should arms and ammunition be surrendered. Any attempt to disarm the workers must be frustrated by force if necessary. The destruction of the bourgeois democrats' influence over the workers, and the enforcement of conditions which will compromise the rule of bourgeois democracy, which is for the moment inevitable, and make it as difficult as possible. These are the main points which the proletariat and therefore the League must keep in mind during and after the approaching uprising. 3. As soon as the new governments have established themselves, their struggle against the workers will begin. If the workers are to be able to forcibly oppose the democratic petty bourgeois, it is essential above all for them to be independently organized and centralized in clubs. At the soonest possible moment after the overthrow of the present governments, the Central Committee will come to Germany and will immediately convene a Congress, submitting to it the necessary proposals for the centralization of the workers' clubs under a directorate established at the movement's center of operations. The speedy organization of at least provincial connections between the workers' clubs is one of the prime requirements for the strengthening and development of the workers' party. The immediate result of the overthrow of the existing governments will be the election of a national representative body. Here the proletariat must take care. 1. That by sharp practices local authorities and government commissioners do not, under any pretext whatsoever, exclude any section of workers. 2. That workers' candidates nominated everywhere in opposition to bourgeois democratic candidates. As far as possible, they should be League members and their election should be pursued by all possible means. Even where there is no prospect of achieving their election, the workers must put up their own candidates to preserve their independence, to gauge their own strength, and to bring their revolutionary position and party standpoint to public attention. They must not be led astray by the empty phrases of the Democrats, who will maintain that the workers' candidates will split the Democratic Party and offer the forces of reaction the chance of victory. All such talk means, in the final analysis, that the proletariat is to be swindled. The progress which the proletarian party will make by operating independently in this way is infinitely more important than the disadvantages resulting from the presence of a few reactionaries in the representative body. If the forces of democracy take decisive terroristic action against the reaction from the very beginning, the reactionary influence in the election will already have been destroyed. The first point over which the bourgeois Democrats will come into conflict with the workers will be the abolition of feudalism as in the first French Revolution. The petty bourgeoisie will want to give the feudal lands to the peasants as free property. That is, they will try to perpetrate the existence of the rural proletariat, and to form a petty bourgeois peasant class which will be subject to the same cycle of impoverishment and debt which still afflicts the French peasant. The workers must oppose this plan both in the interest of the rural proletariat and in their own interest. They must demand that the confiscated feudal property remain state property and be used for workers' colonies, cultivated collectively by the rural proletariat with all the advantages of large-scale farming, and where the principle of common property will immediately achieve a sound basis in the midst of the shaky system of bourgeois property relations. Just as the Democrats ally themselves with the peasants, the workers must ally themselves with the rural proletariat. The Democrats will either work directly towards the federated republic, or at least if they cannot avoid the one and indivisible republic, they will attempt to paralyze the central government by granting the municipalities and provinces the greatest possible autonomy and independence. In opposition to this plan, the workers must not only strive for one indivisible German republic, but also within this republic for the most decisive centralization of power in the hands of the state authority. They should not let themselves be led astray by empty democratic talk about the freedom of the municipalities, self-government, etc. In a country like Germany, where so many remnants of the Middle Ages are still to be abolished, where so much local and provincial obstinacy has to be broken down, it cannot under any circumstances be tolerated that each village, each town, and each province may put up new obstacles in the way of revolutionary activity, which can only be developed with full efficiency from a central point. A renewal of the present situation in which the Germans have to wage a separate struggle in each town and province for the same degree of progress can also not be tolerated. Least of all can a so-called free system of local government be allowed to perpetuate a form of property which is more backward than modern private property, and which is everywhere and inevitably being transformed into private communal, namely property, with its consequent disputes between poor and rich communities. Nor can the so-called free system of local government be allowed to perpetuate, side by side with the state civil law, the existence of communal civil law with its sharp practices directed against the workers. As in France in 1793, it is the task of the genuinely revolutionary party in Germany to carry through the strictest centralization. It must be recalled today that this passage is based on a misunderstanding. At that time, thanks to the Bonapartist and liberal falsifiers of history, it was considered as established that the French centralized machine of administration had been introduced by the Great Revolution, and in particular, that it had been used by the convention as an indispensable and decisive weapon for defeating the royalist and federalist reaction and the external enemy. It is now, however, a well-known fact that throughout the revolution of the 18th Premier C, the whole administration of the departments, arrondissements, and communes consisted of authorities elected by the respective constituents themselves, and that these authorities acted with complete freedom within the general state laws, that precisely this provincial and local self-government, similar to the American, became the most powerful lever of the revolution, and indeed to such an extent that Napoleon, immediately after his coup d'état of the 18th Premier, hastened to replace it by the still existing administration by prefects, which therefore was a pure instrument of reaction from the beginning. But no more than local and provincial self-government is in contradiction to political national centralization. Is it necessarily bound narrow-minded up with that cantonal or communal self, seeking which strikes us as so repulsive in Switzerland, and which all the South German federal republicans wanted? To make the rule in Germany in 1849, note by Engels to the 1885 edition, we have seen how the next upsurge will bring the Democrats to power, and how they will be forced to propose more or less socialistic measures. It will be asked what measures the workers are to propose in reply. At the beginning, of course, the workers cannot propose any directly communist measures. But the following courses of action are possible. 1. They can force the Democrats to make inroads into as many areas of the existing social order as possible, so as to disturb its regular functioning and so that the petty bourgeois Democrats compromise themselves. Furthermore, the workers can force the concentration of as many productive forces as means of transport, possible factories, railways, etc. in the hands of the state. 2. They must drive the proposals of the Democrats to their logical extreme. The Democrats will in any case act in a reformist and not a revolutionary manner, and transform these proposals into direct attacks on private property. If, for instance, the petty bourgeoisie propose the purchase of the railways and factories, the workers must demand that these railways and factories simply be confiscated by the state without compensation as The property of reactionaries. If the Democrats propose a proportional tax, then the workers must demand a progressive tax. If the Democrats themselves propose a moderate progressive tax, then the workers must insist on a tax whose rates rise so steeply that big capital is ruined by it. If the Democrats demand the regulation of the state debt, then the workers must demand national bankruptcy. The demands of the workers will thus have to be adjusted according to the measures and concessions of the Democrats. Although the German workers cannot come to power and achieve the realization of their class interests without passing through a protracted revolutionary development, this time they can at least be certain that the first act of the approaching revolutionary drama will coincide with the direct victory of their own class in France and will thereby be accelerated. But they themselves must contribute most to their final victory by informing themselves of their own class interests, by taking up their independent political position as soon as possible, by not allowing themselves to be misled by the hypocritical phrases of the democratic petty bourgeoisie into doubting for 1 minute the necessity of an independently organized party of the proletariat. Their battle cry must be the permanent revolution. Source of text: Marxists Internet Archive. Marxists. Org.